Carey.
Thank you, my lady. Just put it down. My lady, the first witnesses to be called this morning are impact witnesses from each of the 4 bereaved groups. Inevitably, they will be discussing distressing themes, including end-of-life care and death. And indeed, the 4th witness this morning will also cover matters including death by suicide. Can I remind, therefore, everyone in the hearing room and those watching online that there is support available here at Dorland House and on the inquiry website. And if anyone wishes to leave the hearing room, they should feel free to do so. May I hand over now to Miss Cecil, King's Counsel.
Thank you very much. Miss Cecil.
Indeed. Good morning, my lady. May I please call Jane Wierzbowska?
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm
that the
evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming to help us today. We do appreciate it, and I do understand how difficult it may be. So I'm sure Ms Cecil's already said, if you need a break at any stage, just say. Although, again, I think she may have told you, most people I find it's easier to get it over with.
Yes.
But it's up to you, all right?
Okay, thank you, my lady.
Thank you. Mrs. Wierzbowska, you're here today to share with the inquiry your experiences during the pandemic in terms of your story, your family's story, and your mother's story. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so with that, I'd like to begin by asking you a little bit about your mum, Patricia Smalley,
Yes.
plainly much loved, sadly died during the second wave of the pandemic
Yes.
on the 27th of January 2021.
Yes.
And she was 91, is that right?
She was just 91, yes, in
Just
that month, yes.
About a month after her 91st birthday.
Almost, yeah. A few days, yeah.
Oh, a few days, my apologies. Firstly, if you may, could you just tell us in a couple of words what type of woman your mum was?
Yeah, my mum was an incredibly strong and resilient lady, really, throughout her life. She was friendly, she was fun-loving, she had a wonderful sense of humour, and family meant absolutely everything to her. But she was also, it sounds contradictory, but she was also quite a private person as well. So in a number of ways, that makes it quite difficult for me to share what happened to us today. But I know she'd want me to do it as our story impacts on so many others as well. And I want to do it because I want us to not forget what really matters. The love and care of our families, which no politician or care home manager should be allowed to deny us.
Well, certainly within your statement, and just for those that are following, it's INQ 006-14372.
Right.
You paint a very vivid picture of your mum, her life,
Yes.
her interests. She's a very active woman.
Incredibly active, yes.
And worked in the NHS as a clerk in a children's ward for many years, and was the centre ultimately of your family life, both for you, your younger brother,
Yes.
and of course your dad.
Yes, of course, yes, yes.
So what I'm going to do now, if I may, is turn really to the circumstances leading up to your mum, so certainly firstly entering into the care home. Prior to that, she'd lived a little bit further away, but moved closer to you following your father's death, is that right?
Absolutely, yes, yes.
Initially into supported, sheltered accommodation.
Yes, that's right. And she settled really well there and embraced the community life that was happening in there. So she did very well, as we expected her to.
And she was still fairly independent at that point, and you enjoyed many trips, as I understand it.
We did. We did really, actually, right up until her stroke, yes.
Indeed, and if I can just deal with that, just prior to that, I understand that she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, is that right?
That's absolutely right. Sadly, not too long after she'd moved down, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And obviously that was a huge blow to all of us. As we know, dementia is an untreatable, progressive and terminal disease. But I knew then that what would help her would be lots of stimulation, lots of company, and that's what I set out to give her, really.
And you describe,
in
again, you
time.
describe that, don't you, in your, you give a very vivid description again in your statement of taking her on different trips and National Trust and so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
And really engaging with her interests.
Absolutely, yeah. She loved gardens, she loved nature, she loved animals, so that was a focus pretty much of our trips. And as time went on, when she first was diagnosed, I was working full-time, but in 2014, I went down to 2 days a week so that I could spend more time with her. And in 2017, I retired altogether, and that meant we could go out and do things together every day. And I'm so glad that I did that now.
Thank you. So at the time when she was in sheltered accommodation, as you've already explained, she then subsequently suffered quite a severe stroke. Is that right?
She did, unfortunately. It was extremely severe, and the prognosis actually wasn't terribly good. She lost all mobility down her left-hand side, and so there was absolutely no option but for her to go into care. And she moved into the care home on the 23rd of December 2019, so just a few weeks really before lockdown.
Exactly that. And in terms of a home, you found a home that you were happy with, that she was happy with.
Yes.
Is that right?
Absolutely. But I remember distinctly, it was fortunately closest to where we lived as well. And, you know, so there would be no issues with any kind of transport problems. I knew that I could get there on foot if I needed to. And I remember distinctly saying to her, there is absolutely nothing that can stop me being here with you. And how wrong I was.
And the reason for that was because she required full-time specialist care that was simply not able to be provided in the community or at home with you.
Absolutely, yeah. She was basically immobile, really, yeah.
And so if I can begin then in December of 2019, when she moved in, in terms of her living conditions, how would you describe those?
Within the home.
Within the care home.
Yeah. Well, she had a lovely room there on the ground floor, which overlooked a huge courtyard area. She was right in the corner of it, but nonetheless, there was a nice view. And I took in pots of plants so she could see those, and we had a bird table put outside so she could still enjoy nature. After probably a couple of weeks, they were able to get her into a chair, so she was able to be moved around. It was a huge, heavy armchair-like construction. It was very difficult to move, but you could move her around, so she could go to social events in the lounge, or we could take her to one of the other rooms to sit and have a different kind of social time with her. So it was positive, and I was able to be with her. You know, I was very worried about her, obviously, after her stroke. She was obviously already losing her memory, and she'd lost her mobility. She'd been so active throughout her life, as you mentioned earlier. But she did start to make some progress.
And in terms of just picking up on one of the things you just mentioned there, how often did you visit your mum?
Every day.
December and January 2019?
Every single day. I used to go in the morning, gave them a bit of time to sort of get her up and get her ready. And I'd go in about 10 in the morning, and she used to get tired, so she was ready really to go to sleep in the evening. So I left about 8 in the evening. So I was there all day really with her.
And in terms of what you did when you were there, obviously you were company.
Yes.
You obviously spoke about many different things.
Mm-hmm.
What other activities did you undertake with your mum?
Really, in terms of her well-being, I helped to manage her food. If she wasn't eating well, you know, I'd make sure I'd take in things that might tempt her that I knew that she liked. She had quite a sweet tooth, and I'd do that. Not too long after being in there, she was diagnosed with dysphagia. And so she had to have thickener in tea, and her fluid levels were low. So I would regularly go and make her tea and put the thickener into the tea and help her to drink it as well. You know, she was adjusting as well to life with just one active hand and not being easily mobile. So it was quite important that I did that and kept her fluid levels up. We also had a private physiotherapist come in and assess her. And although she felt that there was no way she was going to probably be able to move her arm again, she did give me some hope about her leg and recommended exercises that we do every day.
And did you do those with her?
Yes, I did. I did.
And in terms of her mental and cognitive state at that point, how would you have described that? So just immediately prior to the pandemic and lockdown.
Obviously, by that point, she'd had Alzheimer's for 7 years, so she did get a bit confused at times. But generally speaking, she was aware of what was going on around her, had opinions about things, and she knew who I was and who the rest of the family were. So that was all very encouraging.
Indeed. And so the pandemic then struck. And you explain in your statement that you were told on the 17th of March that the home was going to be effectively locked down as well. Is that right?
That's absolutely right, yes. The impact was catastrophic on me because, as I've just explained, I was so involved in my mum's care within the care home. And as Counsel to the Inquiry said yesterday, you know, a care home is not a hospital, it's a person's home. But in that moment, that was taken away from us. It was no longer my mum's home because it was going to be alien to her without me there and without other visitors too. But predominantly, as I said, I was there every day.
And was that an immediate lockdown from that point
It
forwards?
was immediate. I got very upset. He came into the room and I was with Mum. I don't think she was quite as aware of what was going on because it was in the evening. And I remember crying and not coping with it at all. And he was trying to say, you need to stop because of your mum.
It's obviously a very, very difficult situation for you both.
It was extremely difficult, yes.
Were you able, or was one of the care staff able to explain to your mum what was going to happen, and in terms of the home being closed and you no longer being able to visit?
I really hope so, but I don't know. I mean, I tried to explain to her then, and I tried to explain to her every time I had some sort of visit, if you can call it that, the phone calls and Skype calls and...
We're going to move to those in
visits,
just...
of
No,
course.
please don't worry, we will go through those in just a moment. Yeah. And certainly within your statement at paragraph 11, what you explain is that you had to try and say goodbye to your mum that day, not knowing when you would have any physical contact or see her again, effectively, in that sense.
Absolutely, and the physical contact turned out to be never. I never had that again with her, and that was 10 months prior to her death. So it seemed extraordinarily cruel and inhumane to be kept apart for that length of time, and increasingly Mum did not understand and reacted in different ways to that, which were equally upsetting to me.
Indeed. I'm just going to move then to the visits that you were able to have. And the initial visits that took place. As I understand it, those were window visits. Is that right?
Yes.
And how would you just describe that for us, please?
Okay, well, Mum was taken into one of the lounges at the front of the building. So there were other residents there. They moved her to the window, and I would stand at the window. The first time I did it, I tried to speak, but of course she couldn't hear me through the window. So the next time I printed off messages for her, which I held up. I mean, how that must have appeared to someone with dementia, I don't know. That her daughter was standing outside of the building where she was when she'd been in there with her every single day and holding up things to read. But she didn't seem agitated or distressed by it. But after 8 days, I was told that I could no longer do that.
And at that point, had you been attending every day with your
Yes.
placards, your pieces of paper?
Yes, every single
having
day.
Did they give a reason?
Pardon?
Sorry to interrupt. Did they give a reason?
They did give a reason. The most significant reason was that they had to think of all their residents' welfare, which, you know, I can appreciate, but I can't see how I was impacting on that. And they had to ring fence the space, the garden, for residents who wanted to go outside. But the grounds were huge, and there were lots of areas that could have been ring-fenced or identified for residents who wanted to. So I can't see how that was a problem.
Thank you. And you just alluded to the fact that they were stopped. They were stopped around the 27th of March. Is that right?
Yes.
And why were they stopped at that point? Do you know?
I think government guidance probably said that should stop too. But I don't really know. That seemed to be so random and changed so frequently, although that was just the beginning, obviously.
Of course. And did you raise your concerns about the lack of visits with the home?
I absolutely did. But at that point, you know, they were adamant that this space should be reserved for residents, and that, you know, government guidelines were saying that there shouldn't be any visits. They said, some residents became distressed, and I said that my mum wasn't distressed by it at all, and that perhaps they should review the situation on a case-by-case basis. But they were adamant that I wasn't going to be able to see her in that way anymore.
Do you know if they ever did review the situation on a case-by-case basis, or were there blanket restrictions or conditions put in place on each occasion?
As far as I know, they didn't review it, but they just kept the blanket ban there.
And you explain in your witness statement that you felt that you were treading on eggshells. What did you mean by that?
I felt I had to be very, very cautious. My mission became, I must see my mum and keep contact with my mum in every single way I can. And from the time that I started doing these window visits, I was also having a 7:00 phone call in the evening. I wanted to speak to her every day before she went to sleep in the evening. And they let me do that. And Skype calls began, and I would have those as often as I could. And I just felt that if I was too pushy, they might not let me have these calls every evening, or some of the Skype calls that I had. And I was terrified that if I pushed too hard, all of my contact with my mum, or a lot of contact with my mum, would be cut off. So it was a balancing act, I feel, to keep, you know, I was persistent, always polite, I hope, but I was determined that I wanted to keep up contact with Mum. I wanted to be able to manage her health care. I'd been doing that for years. I had shared power of attorney for her health as well, and suddenly all that had disappeared. If I couldn't see her or have contact, I didn't know really how she was. And of course, with the dementia, I didn't want her to forget who I was either. And I'm very grateful that she never did.
And so those phone calls then became your daily contact with your mum, is that right, initially after that?
Yes.
And then that progressed into the video calls that you've just described. Mm-hmm. And in terms of those video calls, how frequent were those?
They were variable, so not necessarily regular, but I'd call every day to see if I could have a slot. And generally, they were very helpful in letting me do that if they could. But the nature of the calls was quite difficult at times. Obviously, the technology was not something Mum was familiar with anyway. She couldn't use it because of her mobility issues and because she didn't understand it. So there was never any privacy on the call.
Did you always have a member of staff then present to assist your mum?
Yes, always.
Were these taking place on iPads or something like that?
They were.
They were.
Yes. So they take the iPad to her, and it was variable. I mean, every day or every call, I'd explain why I couldn't be there.
Do you think your mum understood that?
Not really.
Not really?
No. I think it's hard because the world inside the care home was seemingly going on as normal. Nothing there, apart from my absence, had changed. And it haunts me always that she feels that I was choosing not to be there for some reason.
No, I do understand that. And in terms of those video calls, there was then a point where you were able to visit again, to actually physically go to the care home.
Yeah.
That was in around June until September, is that right?
Yes.
And either in the open lounge door or in the garden.
Yes. Yeah.
And were those visits also socially distanced?
Absolutely, they were. Yes. They, Mum was often, because her chair was quite difficult to move, usually in the lounge area with the patio doors open, and there'd be a trestle table keeping distance between us. And that was difficult. Mum often felt the cold, and she would be, distressed by that, and so some of that precious half hour would be spent seeing if I could find someone to go and get a blanket or a cardigan or something to keep her warm.
To make her more comfortable.
To make her more comfortable, yeah, so she could kind of focus on the visit.
And then I understand that those were paused for a short period because there was an outbreak of COVID in the home. Before then, visits resuming, but in a slightly different format again.
Yes.
And they'd evolved to what they called pod visits. And I understand that the care home had had effectively kitted out two purpose-built spaces. One was a former library, one was a former bedroom.
Yes.
But spaces with a perspex screen dividing the room. So again, that distance is there with some level of physical protection.
Yes.
Was I assume the aim, and also a sound system to assist with communication for the obvious needs of the residents within the home.
Yes.
And how did you find those visits?
Difficult again, for different reasons. The problem with booking a half-hour slot anyway is that, you don't know what time of day it's going to be and how Mum's going to be. She'd sometimes be very sleepy, so contact would be limited. When she wasn't, she would almost certainly beckon me in, say, just come on through, and I'd have to, again, explain that I couldn't do that. It was very hard. I mean, obviously, I was pleased to be able to see her in some way possible, but it just really wasn't acceptable. I wasn't able to give her the quality and amount of care that I'd been used to and wanted to. And it was always very distressing, leaving her and her going back to her room. I don't know how much. There was no regulation. I have no idea. I asked questions sometimes, but again, it was that I don't want to be too pushy because they, I phoned every morning to see if there were pod or garden slots, and generally they were very good. And if there were slots, because it was a large care home, they let me in, and I thought if I start pushing too much, they're going to stop that. So again, I held back.
And throughout this period, how was your mother's health, well-being?
Deteriorating, without a doubt. Yes, yeah.
And certainly in terms of the visiting guidance and the different restrictions that were put in place, you explained within your statement that there was a lot of confusion, and there were often competing aspects of guidance, either from national government or the local authority, or indeed other organisations or the care home. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. And again, it just added to my stress and trauma of the situation. One time in particular, I remember that we were in tier 1 as an area, which said that visits could be allowed, but our local public health deemed, apparently, they told me at the care home, that visits weren't safe to continue, and so they followed the local advice and stopped the visits.
And if I can just pick up again on something that you mentioned briefly earlier in relation to, obviously, you weren't able to know exactly what was going on or taking place in the care home in terms of visibility because you weren't there. But you had one concern about whether or not she was being taken to the communal areas and obtaining stimulation in that respect. How did that concern come about?
It came about via one Skype call in particular, and it was a Saturday afternoon, and she was in bed, which concerned me. I didn't know if there was a problem with her health. It turns out that there wasn't, but they just hadn't got her up that day. They were kind of, I guess, staffing, we know, was often a problem, and I think they were just taking it in turns a bit with residents, that they got ready and got up. But it really worried me that for someone in her position who relied totally on others, she was losing her memory, she'd lost her mobility, she'd lost her family, it seemed to her, and she was in her bed on a Saturday afternoon, mid to late afternoon, and I thought, I've no idea how often this might happen, and I didn't even know if on the days that she'd been got up, whether she'd been taken from her room in her chair to the lounge or not. So I just don't know. And again, they weren't questions that I could often ask. It depended sometimes, who was with her, and when I felt I could, I'd say, is Mum going to the lounge later, or has she been to the lounge? But again, it was a bit of a lottery as to what I could say or do.
And you touch upon the impact of isolation upon those with dementia and Alzheimer's within your statement. And certainly in due course, that's what we were hearing from Professor Banerjee, an expert in those matters. And of course, also the Every Story Matters record, which effectively records the same sentiments. I just want to move on, if I may, to immediately prior to your mother contracting COVID within the home. But just before I do that, just touching on an occasion when your mum needed external medical care. And how was that organised? Did you have any difficulties accessing that medical care?
Not really. I think the situation that you're referring to there, that I spoke, as I did when I phoned in the evenings, obviously it would go through to a member of staff, and I was told that Mum's oxygen levels were very low. And obviously I was hugely concerned about that. And I knew from an incident before lockdown where we'd had the rapid response team out that they could do that. And so I requested that they bring in the rapid response team, and they did, and they put her on oxygen.
Thank you. Now I just want to turn to, as I say, later in January of 2021, when your mum contracted COVID. And you explained that she had no real symptoms of COVID and appeared asymptomatic, is that right?
She did. I mean, she was by this stage on the oxygen, but she didn't appear to be struggling with her breathing. There was no coughing, nothing that suggested to me that she had COVID. It did seem asymptomatic, yes.
And were you able to see your mum initially following that diagnosis?
No.
And there came a point where you were aware that she was approaching her end of life. And at that stage, were arrangements made for you to visit?
There were arrangements about probably 5, 6 or so days before her death. Her room, I think I said, was in the corner of a courtyard, a big open area. And I was told that I could go and see her through her bedroom window, through her patio doors. And so I obviously leapt on that, and I took a garden chair with me, and this was January 2021, and hot drink and layers of clothing and my mobile phone. And I went and sat outside her patio door for as long as I could until someone said, you should leave now, or it was dark and she wouldn't have been able to see me anyway. But bizarrely, I had to be on my own. I couldn't take my husband or a friend with me. It was just me, despite I could see no reason, no logical reason why that would pose a threat to anyone. But anyway, I was able to do that. I had my phone. They put a mobile phone in a black bin bag on my mum's shoulder, and I was able to talk to her. I did have conversations then, but obviously she became more ill, and in the last 48 hours of her life, I was allowed end-of-life visits. I'm not sure why end of life had to mean those last hours, why it couldn't have been before. It makes no sense to me. Who determines what is end of life, and why can't there be more dignity than having to speak to Mum through a plastic bag? By the time I was allowed in, probably the first 24 hours, she was conscious, she was aware who I was, but she wasn't communicating with me, she was non-verbal. And then when I went in the next day, she was unconscious. So I
just going to ask you a couple of questions, if I may, about those visits. You've explained you were only allowed to go on your own.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Your husband would often wait in the car outside for you.
Yes.
And in terms of those visits, you would also have to wear PPE equipment, is that
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And that would involve a face mask,
Yeah.
an apron,
Yeah.
and gloves.
Yes.
And in terms of her room, you also explain in your statement that the layout and how it looked changed
It did.
and became more clinical.
It did. Yes.
And how did you feel about that? How do you feel that impacted those visits with your mum?
Again, it didn't feel like a home, her home. It felt more austere and unfriendly and intimidating to her, I think. Probably one of the worst times was after I'd been told she had COVID or had tested positive for COVID. Clearly, she'd seen the changes to her room and clearly seen perhaps a difference in what staff were wearing. And she said to me on my nightly phone call, "Is this it?" And that's the most awful conversation I've had to have. And obviously I tried to reassure her. As I said right at the beginning, she'd been an incredibly strong and resilient woman throughout her life, very powerful, very admirable. And, very matter-of-factly, is this it? But I couldn't say, yes, it is. I think perhaps I was in denial a bit myself because she was asymptomatic and because, she was so strong. I thought perhaps she could pull through it, naively, of course, but you hope for the best in these situations. But it was very difficult, and I think the change in the environment put that idea into her head too.
And in terms of how you were able to visit, you were still socially distanced, as I understand it. So you were still a metre or so away from her.
Yes.
At the end of the bed.
Yes. So again, it seemed so cruel. I couldn't be posing any kind of threat at that point. So, as I said, for 10 months, even as she lay dying, I could have no physical contact with her. And, I remember when I lost my dad in 2010 and he was dying, I promised him that I would look after my mum. And I just felt I'd let her down so badly. And that guilt just is with me always.
And certainly, but you were there when she passed away with her.
Yes.
And you stayed for a while after that, as I understand it, with her.
I did. Yeah, one of the nurses went to tell Mike, who was in the car park, what had happened. And he was allowed to come round to the door to check on me. but he still wasn't allowed to come into the room, which, again, makes no sense to me.
It must have been an incredibly lonely experience for you.
It
And
was.
distressing. And I just want to touch, if I may, then onto the funeral arrangements. You explained that it was really at this point that you were able to touch your mum again for the first time as part of those end of life rituals and the care that was being undertaken by the undertakers. Your mum had paid for a funeral plan herself; she'd set it all up, but they were unable to facilitate that, and so you chose, understandably, to move to a different undertakers who could facilitate that.
Yes.
And did that bring some small level of comfort to you?
Excuse me. Yes, it did, ultimately. There was a lot of additional trauma that shouldn't have been there, really. But again, I think funeral directors were following guidelines, just as care homes were following guidelines. So they were making their own decisions. There was no law to allow, people to have the comfort and humanity of being with loved ones, living or dead. But it was a huge relief to me, yes, to be able to find a provider. And the original funeral home did actually help me in finding someone who would allow me to visit. And yes, I spent as much time as I could with my mum while I could.
Of course. And then, as you described then, a funeral taking place in accordance with the restrictions at the time,
Yes.
socially distanced and
Yes. Yeah.
and all of those restrictions in place. If I may turn on really to one aspect of her legacy, if I may. You've been since subsequently involved in quite a significant amount of campaigning work, and that's covered within your statement in some detail, and also working with One Dementia Voice.
Yes.
And one aspect that you consider to be very important is about granting either a family member or a friend. Firstly, within the pandemic, it was key worker status.
Yes.
But more broadly, now a legal right, effectively.
Absolutely.
And you're a supporter of what's called Gloria's Law.
Yes.
Would you like to tell us just a little bit about that? I know that's important to you.
It's absolutely critical to me, after my experience and witnessing my mum's deterioration through a screen. That didn't have to happen. She could have had the comfort and love of a family member, and she could have had my support continually with her health and well-being. And to have been denied that, to me, seems absolutely immoral. Against all human rights, I believe. And so, quite a shock to me. I did become, I am a campaigner. I didn't choose activism, I was activated. I really, really passionately believe in Gloria's Law, which is the legal right to a care supporter. And it absolutely has to be legal, because we saw what happened with guidelines. Everyone approached them differently. They changed all the time. But to give someone legal status and that peace of mind and reassurance, I think is absolutely critical for a humane society.
Thank you very much for sharing your story with us. I've no further questions, my lady.
You've become a very eloquent campaigner, so you may have missed your vocation, I think. Thank you very much indeed for helping the inquiry. I know it doesn't help for me to say it, but you did keep your promise, and you did look after her to the best of your ability. So I don't think I'll forget the image of you sitting outside in January, wrapped up in English winter, or British winter. I'm so sorry for what happened to you at the end, but try to remember the positives of your life together, and we shall investigate the negatives.
Thank you so much, my lady.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. As I said earlier, really, really, it shouldn't be care home managers and politicians deciding whether we can care for our loved ones. It really shouldn't.
I think there'll be many people who obviously remember the awful number of deaths during the pandemic, but hadn't really appreciated this particular point that you've made so eloquently. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, my lady.
Monsieur.
My lady, the next witness is Mrs. Judith Kilbee.
Repeat after me, please. I do solemnly,
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and
nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, please.
Thank you very much for coming along to help us. Sorry we kept you waiting for a short time. I hope you were warned. And if any stage you need a break, please just say, I'm sure Ms. Young has told you, but you may find it easier to get it over with, because I know it won't be easy.
Could you start by giving us your full name, please?
Judith Kilbee.
And you've provided a witness statement dated the 2nd of May 2025. That's at INQ 000614380.
Yes.
Is it right that you have a background in nursing
Yes, I do.
and you've worked in nursing homes before
Nursing home and care homes.
and care homes, and you've also worked as a business manager for a specialist care home group?
Yes, that's correct.
So it's fair to say that you're fairly knowledgeable and experienced in the way that care homes operate.
Generally, yes.
But you've come today to talk about your personal experience, is that right?
That's right.
And that's in relation to one particular care home in Scotland that your dad was in and sadly died in on the 10th of May 2020.
Yes.
Before we talk about your dad's time in the home, could you just tell us a little bit about your dad, please, about his character, his sense of humour, what he liked to do?
He was a Geordie. He had a great sense of humour, as I think many of them do. He loved nature. He loved the environment. He always stood up for people that he felt were mistreated. He taught all his children lots about nature, and you know, we were hounded by what's that bird when we went for a walk. You never had any peace. And he invested those interests into all of his grandchildren as well. I never heard him say a bad word about anyone. He was a sociable, happy person.
Is it right that he had 8 grandchildren?
He had 8 grandchildren, yes.
And he loved spending time with his family?
Yes, very much so. And he was very practical. He always wanted to help when he came to visit. So he was, a very genuine person.
Is it right that your dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's?
Yes, shortly, a couple of years after my mum died. But that Alzheimer's manifested it just really in short-term memory loss. He never changed his personality or lost his sense of humour, was always grateful. It wasn't someone that would wander. He was still driving before he went into the home after the stroke.
When you say it really just affected his short-term memory, did he need constant reminding, for example, to take his medicine?
Yes, latterly at home, we were having to ring up and remind him and plan meals for him and that kind of thing to make sure that he looked after himself.
You mentioned that he was still driving. He was fairly independent, was he?
He was very independent, loved getting out for drives in the countryside. And, so he relied on his car because he lived in a small village and that took him to all his activities.
One thing in particular that he very much enjoyed doing is going to a place called Healthy Hearts, is that right?
Yes.
And is that somewhere where he would go and exercise and socialise?
Yes, he had a stent put in many years ago and that was part of the local health board offering, which was cardiac rehabilitation. So he went for something like 15 years, twice a week, and he would do volleyball and aerobics.
And
at
did that, sorry to interrupt you.
Sorry. And that continued up until he had that stroke.
And was that very much a support for him after your mother died?
Yes, it was, because she used to go sometimes with him and just take part in the exercises, but it was a structure for him. You know, he would mark his calendar because of his memory. He'd have a red heart on each of the days that he went to Healthy Heart, so his calendar always told him which day it was.
You mentioned that your dad had a stroke. Was that in September 2018?
Yes, it was.
And you were with him at the time?
Yes, I'd spoken to him on the phone the night before and came off the phone and said to my husband, I feel, Dad, there's something wrong. He says he's not depressed, but his voice is weak, it's thready. I'm going to see him tomorrow. So I was called down to see him, found him confused and unstable on his feet, and he had a stroke in front of me. So I knew there was something happening, and I was right.
And is it right that as a result of that he spent 3 weeks in hospital?
He did, yes.
And it was after that that the decision was made that he should go into a care home?
Yes, he wouldn't have managed at home immediately following the stroke, so the decision was made then.
Could I ask you just to slow down a tiny bit?
Sorry.
Please, Mrs. Kilbee,
Certainly.
thank you. So he went into a care home in Scotland. It was a small care home, is that right?
Yes,
And it was based in Scotland but had a head office in England.
it did, yes.
Your dad made a full recovery from the stroke, didn't he?
Completely.
And in January 2019, you arranged for him to start attending Healthy Hearts again once a week, is that right?
Yes, because of the nature of the home, it was so small that he would be lucky if he'd walk 20 steps from A to B. And there wasn't a garden per se, there was a little courtyard out the back. So I felt that for his mental well-being and mobility, he needed to be doing some activity. So felt that it was time to try it and spoke to Healthy Hearts and the home, who agreed, but the home couldn't take him because they didn't have the staff capacity.
So the home was nearby Healthy Hearts?
It was.
But they weren't able to help
No.
with that? So is it right that you did a 100-mile round trip to take
Once a
your
week.
dad?
It wasn't
Once-
twice a week at that point. It was once a week. And if I couldn't do it because I was away with work, my husband kindly would step in and do that. So we felt it was important to keep Dad mobile and keep him in that environment.
And were you able to see any benefit in him attending?
Massively. He would forget where he was going and say, where's this place? And as soon as he walked in, well, even before you walked in, you'd walk through the car park and he'd see a face he recognised and start chatting to them. And muscle memory was there. When the music started, he knew what aerobics he was going to do to each particular piece of music. So it was really beneficial for him, yes.
Thank you, Mrs. Kilbee. Can we now move on, please, to some of the infection prevention control measures
Certainly.
at the home? Because it's right, isn't it, that you had some serious concerns about the measures that are in place there?
I didn't feel that they were really understanding or set up to do proper infection prevention and control.
Okay, we're going to go through some of those concerns.
Mm.
It's right, isn't it, that your dad's birthday was on the 12th of March 2020, and that's the last
Yes.
time you were able to see him in person?
Yes.
And on that day, did you take him out to the countryside?
We did.
With some tea and some cake?
We did. It was something my parents did often. They would take a flask and go out and sit somewhere looking at nature. We made it very clear to the home that that's what we were doing, and emphasised that we weren't taking Dad anywhere near people. We wouldn't have taken him into a cafe or anything, because we were really concerned about the COVID situation. So that's what we did.
And why did you feel the need to tell the home where you were going and the fact that you weren't going to go near people?
Because we felt that they hadn't quite grasped the enormity of what was coming, and having seen the images on TV in Spain and Italy in care homes, we were acutely aware of it. and really wanted to hammer that point home.
And when you said this to the manager, do you remember what the manager's response was?
I asked him about reducing footfall through the home and urged him to do so, and was told, we haven't been told to lock down yet.
When you got back to the home, they had very kindly prepared some birthday cake, is that right?
Yes.
And your dad blew out the candles and shared his cake with the other residents. Were they together in the same room when they did that?
There were a few residents in the room, but they all congregated. There were few numbers in the home, so they would congregate around a large dining table. So we didn't see him having the cake with them, but they got him to blow out the candles, and then they were taking the cake to the table for everyone to share. And I remember thinking at the time, I didn't say anything to them at the time, but thinking this is maybe normal practice in the past, but this is, you're not aware of the COVID issue. This shouldn't be happening now.
Did it appear to you that the staff understood what the potential risks were?
Not at that time, no.
You say that there was some hand gel available at the care
Yes,
home.
there was.
And visitors were encouraged to use that gel.
Yes.
Were there any other measures in place that you could see?
Not that we could see at that time, no.
And it's right, isn't it, that day you waited for him outside the toilet so you could remind him to wash his hands?
Yes, because he was mobile and independent in that way. But I wanted to make sure that he didn't just wash his hands and just run them under the tap. I wanted to make sure he did it properly.
And was that something that he needed reminding to do?
Not to wash his hands, no, but to use the gel or to wash his hands thoroughly, yes.
Is it right that a week later there was a review due in regard to your father, and you suggested meeting remotely for that?
We actually said we wouldn't come in for it because we didn't want, again, emphasising the footfall through the home. So we wanted to do that remotely, yes.
And the manager's response was to meet in the conservatory instead, which would avoid going into the home. What were your concerns with that?
We refused to do that because we said that although we're meeting in the conservatory, you're meeting us and then you're going back into the home, which is the same as us, to my mind, going into the home.
Can I ask you about the recruitment of staff, please? In April 2020, is it right that that you saw a notice from, I think you say in your statement that it was Public Health Scotland, but could it have been the local public health teams?
Which statement, sorry?
In your witness statement, you refer to a statement from Public Health Scotland about capacity and offering staff support if needed. Do you know if that could have been from the local public health teams rather than Public Health Scotland?
It may well have been. I certainly, when I heard of the planning to bring staff in, I did find in writing something that said that to contact the local team or the team, I thought it was Public Health Scotland, who would help with staffing.
And is it right that you saw an advert from the care group advertising for temporary staff?
Yes, they were advertising within their own network on Instagram, advertising for temporary staff.
You say that they were asking particularly for school leavers and shop assistants. Do you know why they were asking for those in particular?
Presumably because they were low paid and they would be available.
Do you know if they took up the offer from the local public health teams for extra support for staffing?
I don't know if he even approached them.
And it's right, isn't it, that soon afterwards there were indeed some new staff at the care home?
Yes, there were several youngsters.
When you say youngsters, I think in some cases they were teenage offspring of the care staff.
Certainly of people that were associated with the home, yes.
And do you know what kind of jobs they were given? Were they given any jobs relating to personal care?
I asked about this and asked if they would be given appropriate training and was told that they would be given suitable training for the tasks they had to complete. So I assumed it would include personal care.
Do you know what PPE they were given to wear?
I don't think at that time anyone was wearing PPE. I don't think the guidance had come through at that point.
But is it right that you were at that point very concerned about their knowledge of PPE and IPC measures?
Yes, I was.
On the 18th of April 2020, the manager came in with symptoms, is that right?
Yes.
And he thought that it was just a cold.
Yes.
And I think the next day he did a test. I think you say because he wanted to prove that it was just a cold.
Yes, he did.
And in fact, the test came back positive, is that right?
Yes.
Do you know if there was any policy or protocol in place at the time about what staff should do if they had symptoms?
I don't know what their own policies were. I think certainly there were staff that were isolating after that. So I think they did stay away from work. But obviously he'd been in with what he thought was a cold, which proved to be COVID.
And on the 21st of April, you emailed the home to ask about testing of residents and staff, and that's because of the recent Scottish guidance that had been issued.
Yes.
And can you tell us what your particular concern was?
My concern was that as their head office was based in England, that they appeared to be following England-centric guidance, and I didn't think they were very aware of what the local guidance was saying, and I wanted to make sure that if there was testing available that they were aware of that, because up until that point there hadn't been testing for every resident.
And did it change after that?
I believe shortly after that there was the testing was for people showing symptoms, and very quickly after that pretty much everybody, albeit not on the same day, was showing symptoms and therefore tested, but they were tested in batches of a couple of people at a time.
Can I ask you about the isolation of residents?
Yes.
There came a time, didn't there, when your dad was isolated, and it was decided to isolate him in the lounge area, whereas all of the other residents, I think, were isolated in their rooms. Can you tell us why it was decided that your dad would be isolated in the lounge?
I think because he was mobile and sociable. It was decided by the home, along with my power of attorney siblings, that isolating him in inverted commas, isolating in the lounge was the best thing for him. No attempt was made to isolate him in his room.
And when you say in inverted commas isolating, is that because it was really the hub of the building where staff would go during their breaks and people would go in and out?
Yes. The two sides of the building were connected by the lounge. So to get from one half of the building to the other, everyone went through the lounge. So it literally was the hub of the building.
So you were concerned that your dad was at greater risk by being there. Do you remember what your manager's response was to your concerns?
His response was that, don't worry, we have new guidance coming. I'll send it to you to show the PPE that we're going to be using, and to reassure me that nobody would be allowed in the lounge without a mask.
And was that guidance saying that PPE should be worn for all sessional care? So that was a mask, apron and gloves that would start when entering a resident's room and end when leaving?
Yes. And my concern there was that what was a session? In Dad's case, if he was being brought from his room upstairs, down the stairs, along the corridor and into the lounge, where did the session start and end? And where did the PPE changing start and end?
Do you know if the care home had sufficient PPE to follow that guidance?
I believe they did, and I know that in the early part of the pandemic, before lockdown, the manager actually travelled to middle of England to get extra PPE from their head office as well. So I think it was available in Scotland, and they sourced their own.
And did your dad have any hand washing facilities in the lounge area?
No.
And your concern, is it right, was that he would then be touching door handles and things like that that staff and other people would be using?
Yes, because he would take himself to the toilet and touch things on the way, and if he wasn't escorted to do that, how did anyone know that those things were clean?
Is it right that the day that the guidance came out, your dad and several other residents started displaying symptoms?
Yes.
And your dad's test came back positive on the 25th of April 2020?
It did, yes.
Along with 4 other residents?
Yes.
Is it right that the next day you heard that staff were travelling from the Midlands to help out in the home?
Yes.
And your concern about that was that they may be bringing COVID with them into the home?
They were coming from an area that was a hotspot at the time for COVID, and my concern was that there may be different viral strains. Another concern was that you weren't allowed to travel those distances, and you weren't supposed to be moving people from one home to the other, let alone from one country to another, and also concerned about the quarantining of those individuals and testing.
And did you raise those concerns?
I did.
What response did you get?
I was assured that they would be appropriately quarantined and tested.
And do you know if that happened?
I don't know for certain, but they were in the home within a couple of days, so I doubt very much that happened.
And in terms of their uniforms, is it right that rather than wearing scrubs or uniforms that could be put through a hot wash, they were wearing T-shirts, but otherwise just their own clothes?
Yes, that applied to all staff. I think the guidance came out about bagging of uniforms and washing them on the premises in a hot wash. But they literally, the home issued T-shirts, and in some photographs they came down to people's elbows. So, and they wore their own trousers or whatever as well.
On the 27th of April, you called the home, and your dad was COVID positive at this point, is that right?
Yes.
And you were told by a staff member that your dad had a lovely time playing in the lounge with balloons with some of the staff, is that right?
Yes.
And why did that cause you concern?
Well, obviously I wasn't there and I wasn't able to see, but the idea of a COVID sick person playing balloons in a lounge didn't seem to make any sense to me on any level. I mean, they may have blown them up with a machine, I don't know, but it didn't make any sense to me. And I was also concerned that if there were sufficient staff to play balloons in the lounge, why were those staff not being utilised to help isolate my father in his room, which could easily have been done as there was an office next door.
And it's right, isn't it, that in the following days you also saw some photographs of your dad and staff members standing fairly close to him. Were they wearing PPE?
No, we were sent a photograph from a relative who went and visited through the window, and it showed the staff member standing less than 2 feet from Dad in a long-sleeved shirt buttoned at the wrist, no apron, no mask, no gloves.
And is it right that you found out afterwards that staff member in fact had a cough when he was looking after your
When I
dad?
spoke to him after Dad died, he said, well, actually, today's the first day that I haven't had a cough.
Your dad became a bit unsteady on his feet, is that right?
He did, yes.
And started having to be accompanied to the toilet.
They volunteered that they were now accompanying him to the toilet because he was unsteady, and that just screamed to me, why weren't you doing that in the first place to make sure of the hygiene and the infection control.
And on the 1st of May, he started showing signs of poor balance, decreased mobility and laboured breathing. Is that right?
Yes.
An ambulance was called on that day. Did they say that they were not minded to take him to hospital?
Yes, they did.
It was suggested that he have a sample taken to see if he had an infection, a urine tract infection.
Yes.
In fact, he had some antibiotics and he got a little bit better. Is that right?
That's right.
And is it right that he was moved, or on the 30th of April, the suggestion was made to move him into a room downstairs, but your concerns about that was that that room had been previously lived in by a resident who had died of COVID?
Yes.
And who was going to be carrying out the cleaning of that room?
The staff in the care home did the cleaning also, so they didn't have a cleaner. I was concerned that if they moved Dad to that room, everything would have to be cleaned as per the guidance, which would have involved long floor-to-ceiling curtains being cleaned thoroughly and furniture cleaned. I didn't see how that was going to be done in the COVID circumstances.
So the cleaning was going to be done by the staff, and is it right that that day 4 staff tested positive for COVID?
Yes.
Along with some further residents, I think 8 out of 9.
Yes.
You were sent some further photographs of your dad, and you were quite upset by one in particular. Do you remember the photograph I'm talking about, where
Yes.
you turned to your husband and you said your dad was dying?
Yes, my husband and I had been for a walk and we got home and a message came through from my brother. Sent me a picture of Dad taken through the window, and I barely recognised him. And I just took one look at it and turned to my husband and said, Dad's dying.
You also received a video the following day.
Yes.
How did he look in that?
Grey, disorientated. Dad was musical. He could recite long poems, and he was trying to clap along to music, and he couldn't even coordinate his hands to clap. He was clearly, to me, hypoxic and extremely unwell.
And it's right, isn't it, that in fact at 11:30 p.m. that day, he was very unwell with low oxygen sats, and the manager called 999.
Yes.
They told him to call 111.
Mm-hmm. They did. Sorry, not mm-hmm. Yes.
And do you remember what the doctor said?
The doctor said, we don't take COVID positive residents to hospital. Order the end of life pack.
And did it appear to you at the time that your dad was in need of an end of life pack?
It appeared to me at the time that Dad needed oxygen and support. And I knew that he needed help if he was going to recover.
Is it right that you yourself called 111?
I did. I think in the end it was possibly 2 a.m. before I managed to speak to somebody. But I'd read in the press for a statement from the local medical director a week earlier saying that there was absolutely no barrier to care home residents with COVID going into hospital, and they were sitting at 55% occupancy, and there was absolutely no reason why they wouldn't be admitted. So I knew that was the case, and what I did was challenge why that statement was made, because that wasn't Scottish Government guidance and it wasn't local guidance. And the doctor on 111 was extremely aggressive and said to me, so you want me to admit your father now? And I said, no, I want my dad to be given the treatment that he needs when he needs it. And he reluctantly then agreed to send the COVID team in the following day.
And is it right that when the COVID team came to the home and the consultant saw your dad, he agreed that your dad was not at the end of his life?
Yes, it was a she.
A she, sorry.
I made sure that I spoke with her. She said, your dad is certainly not end of life. His chest is clear, but he needs rest. So we'll set some parameters. It was a long conversation about, which I referred to as the tipping point. How do we get intervention for Dad before he passes that tipping point where it's not going to be helpful? And that's why she set up the parameters that she did.
And was it agreed that if his oxygen saturation fell below 92%, the COVID team should be called? However, if they fell below 88%, that should trigger a 999 call?
Yes.
And your dad should be taken to hospital if
Yes.
needed? She said that his chest was clear, but he was exhausted and needed rest. Is that
Yes.
right? And reassured you that there was no blanket policy of not admitting care residents?
Yes, she did.
Over the next few days, is it right that you remained anxious and distressed?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, very much so. It was like everything we were thinking about all the time.
You were obviously worried about your dad's health.
Yes.
But is it also the case that you were concerned that the staff that were looking after him were not trained or knowledgeable about the signs to look out for?
Yes, they were measuring pulse oximetry, but I didn't feel that they knew the signs of hypoxia, and that's because of various calls they'd made. So when they had called for help for Dad, and they were asked by the person on 111, is he distressed? The statement back to the doctor was, no, he's not distressed, but he was sitting in a chair all night. He was sitting in a chair all night. He never did that. He was doing that because he couldn't breathe. But they didn't understand that what respiratory distress looked like. He wasn't aggressive or distressed, therefore he wasn't distressed. They couldn't report properly to the medical staff.
And when you say he was sitting all day, it's right, isn't it, that he was in fact moved to that residence room that we discussed earlier?
Yes.
And is it right that rather than having his chair moved from the lounge, you saw from photographs that he was in fact sitting in the chair that belonged to the previous resident
Yes.
who had COVID?
Yes.
And do you know if that chair had been cleaned?
It was a fabric chair. It was a friend of mine's mum who had died in that room. I knew it was the same chair. Dad's bed was not his bed. It was the same bed as that lady had. And I don't think anything had been deep cleaned. It may have been cleaned, but to my knowledge, the curtains were never taken down. I saw the personalised things, his photographs and things in the room, but I could clearly see it wasn't his own furniture.
And your dad became unwell again that day. He developed a rash, is that right?
Yes,
But by the time the doctor came, the rash had gone.
yes,
And the doctor said not to call again unless his oxygen sats dropped below 75%,
Yes.
sustained period.
yes.
That was inconsistent with what you had been told
It was
previously.
inconsistent with what I'd been told, and I believe it was inconsistent with life.
And in fact, the night before your dad died, he had sats of 85% and had been grunting all night, is that right?
Yes,
Is it right that you were told in the afternoon that your dad was nearing death?
yes, I was told in the morning that he was grunting all night, which rang alarm bells for me, and then got a call later to say, your dad is end of life. It could be days, it could be hours, or it could be days. And we jumped in the car immediately.
You live 90 minutes away
Yes.
from the home. Did you get there in time
No,
to see your dad?
we pulled over about 3 miles away because I got a phone call. And we didn't get there in time, no.
One of your brothers was there with your dad, is that right?
Yes,
And he was in full PPE,
yes.
but he was able to sit with your dad as he passed away.
Dad wasn't conscious or aware at that point, but he was in the room with him, yes.
And is it right that you decided not to go into the room?
Yes, because our son drove us there. Our daughter came from her home and we were all outside. My brother was beckoning for me to come in, but knowing that the home was full of COVID. And Dad was already gone. I wasn't prepared to go in. But my brother had signalled to me that he said, "Come in, I'm keeping him warm for you." He had wrapped a blanket around him to keep him warm for me getting there.
Are you okay to carry
Yes,
on?
I'm fine.
And in your statement, you summarise the last 17 days of your dad's life by saying that he had struggled for those days and died, struggling to breathe, without any oxygen, supportive fluids, or end-of-life medication to alleviate his distress.
Yes.
You also mention the last words your dad said to you on a video call. Do you remember what those were?
"When are you coming for me?"
You say those words will haunt you forever.
Yes.
Can you just tell us a little bit more about the impact that your dad's death has had on you and your family?
It's had a huge impact, which is why I'm here, because I want to prevent other people going through this. Had an impact in making you feel isolated from friends and colleagues as they got back to normal. It made my daughter suffer from real health anxiety and very, very anxious about both of us as her parents because of seeing the loss of her granddad, to the point that we didn't hug one another until we were all vaccinated. So, and, you know, we've lived with it. We're very aware of COVID, and there's still anxiety when we go into crowded places, but we're all doing fine now and back to normal. But it has had a lasting impact on all of us.
And you talk about the funeral, and you say about that that there were no hugs, no collective memories of Dad and his life, no celebration of a life well lived, but rather a complete absence of the usual support in the grieving process. Is that right?
Yes, it was no grandchildren could be there. There were only 10 people allowed. He had 4 children. They had their partners, so there were no grandchildren. Our son gave us a letter to put in the grave. I don't know what that said, but that was all he had.
Thank you. And since your dad's death, the Scottish COVID Bereaved Group has been a big support to you.
Hugely, because finding people on Facebook in the early days that actually got it and understood what you were going through was a huge support. And I was part of the early group that started work on looking for inquiries and wanting to make that happen.
Those are all the questions I have. Thank you very much for coming to assist the inquiry.
Thank you.
Kilbee, when you suggested things to the manager of the care home with your experience, how did they take it? Did they think that you were interfering? Did they think you were being helpful? What was the response that you got?
I tried to be very balanced in what I did, and I was very aware, being a nurse, that every time somebody phoned, it was pulling them away from what they were there to do. And as there were 4 of us, and one sibling was ringing every day, I would email and message rather than phone. I was aware also of the hygiene of passing phones around. Generally speaking, it was taken on board, and seemed to be appreciated. But I'm not sure that it actually was, because there were statements made by the manager, things like, we'll be out of the woods now, we're on day 14. And I had to tell him that the average person, elderly person, died on day 18 to 21. And I was told, you've dashed my hopes. I thought we were out of it. So I think they were at best incredibly naive. The comment was made, we have a mild version here.
From your experience, I mean, obviously you've got a great deal of experience within business manager of care home group. Have you managed to analyse whether this was the lack of implementation of IPC measures was particular to this care home or this group of care homes, or have you worked out whether this was something that others in your group have found in other care homes?
I believe that it probably was happening in many care homes. I think the absence of care inspector going in, GPs going in and relatives going in meant there were no checks and balances. How did people know what was going on? I kept close to it by looking at WhatsApp messages. There was a WhatsApp group for families, and I kept abreast of all the guidance and things, and when something needed flagging, I flagged it. But it was trying to get that balance right to not intrude. I don't think we know what was going on in care homes. The doors were shut and we didn't have access to see that. So I would imagine if what was happening in my dad's home was probably happening in varying degrees across the board.
But by this stage, as you say, we've been seeing photographs of the impact of COVID and awful impact, particularly on the more elderly. It's extremely concerning, as obviously you were at the time, that care homes who catered for the most vulnerable weren't conscious of what they should be doing.
No, I agree.
Thank you very much indeed for your help.
Thank you, Millie.
And I'm sorry you went through what you went through. You obviously did your very best.
I did, and I think that's one of the hardest things that I did, my utmost. I guided and helped at every step of the way to try and get the right care for Dad, and fulfil my promise to Mum that I would look after him.
You did your best.
And I did my best, and I know I did. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll break now, and I shall return at 22.
Thank you, my lady. The next witness is Agnes McCusker.
Your right hand, repeat after me, please. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Please take a seat.
I don't know how long you've been at the hearing. I hope we haven't kept you waiting too long and that you've been looked after while you've been here.
No, Lady Hallett, I was very glad to have been here, to have watched the previous two participants, and I feel it has helped.
Good. And you heard what I've said to them, obviously. If you need a break, please just say, but you may find it easier if we
Yeah.
try and plough on. But it's up to you, all right?
Okay, thank you.
Can you start by giving us your full name, please?
Yes, my full name is Agnes McCusker.
Thank you. You're quite softly spoken. Could I ask you just to try and keep your voice up, please?
Okay, thank you.
It's very important that your evidence is heard. If it helps, you can try and bring the microphone closer to you.
Okay. And this one?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for coming today. You've come to tell us the story about your mother, is that right?
That's correct.
Who died in a care home in Northern Ireland
Yes,
on the 12th of April 2020.
yes.
Was she about 94 years old at the time?
She was 94 when she went into the nursing home. She would have been coming close to her 96th birthday.
And she'd been living in the care home for about 2 years.
Yes, that's correct.
Prior to that, did she live with your brother?
She did. She lived at home. She lived at home with my brother she had never been in or out of hospital, so she'd lived with him. And various members of the family would call with her, yeah.
And was she very active and mobile?
Yes, well, all of her life she was. In recent years, she wasn't as active, but was able to do her housework, was able to make herself and my brother some lunch, dinner, tea for anyone who called, did all her own cleaning, washing. I could have gone out on many's a day and found her taking all the ornaments off some unit and cleaning them all. So she always kept herself busy. She never sat down until it was, near time at night to go to bed.
And is it right that the reason she ended up going into a home is that she had a fall?
Yes.
And then she struggled to get a care package in place.
She got a fall and had to go to the local hospital where it was diagnosed that she had a fracture of her pelvic bone. And although they said they couldn't do a lot for it, they would keep her in for a week under observation. And they changed her medication, took her off quite a few medications that they said she never needed to be on. And they then said when she was getting home, she would need the help of 2 people to help her initially. And she was visited then by the physiotherapist and the occupational therapist. And a social worker then became involved with us in terms of trying to get her a care package. She lived in a rural country area, and the care package at either side of her only stopped in the towns closest to them, and my mother lived in the middle. So they tried for weeks to get a care package, and as time went on, we then had to make a decision with the nursing home if my mother was going to stay there, because the time had run out, in their words, for them to find a care package, and the home wanted to know if she was staying or if she was going home to her own house.
And did she suffer another fall against the radiator?
She suffered 2 more falls. One was on her 94th birthday. We went to the nursing home with a birthday cake, and all her family turned up to find that she was sitting at the front door in a wheelchair waiting to be taken to hospital for an x-ray. So she was taken for an x-ray and thankfully hadn't broken anything, and then subsequently returned back to the nursing home again, where she was placed in nursing care. The home had 2 separate parts. They had a nursing care section and a residential section for a small number of people at the back of the home.
And when COVID came, was your your mother was living in the nursing section?
Yes, she was.
And did you try and get some physiotherapy support for her to try and get her back on her feet?
Yes, physiotherapists had called out at the home, and we were never informed of when they called or who they spoke to. They would have probably needed a family member present, but we weren't told when the physiotherapist was coming to the home. So while we did inquire, we were told that the physiotherapist would come in once every so often and take my mother for a short walk and determine what her mobility issues were. And we are just led to believe that that did happen, but we never saw it happening. But her mobility didn't get better.
So she was unable to get back on her feet by the time the pandemic came?
Yes,
right.
she was initially walking with the help of a walking frame. And then she had another fall. But the other fall occurred when they moved her from nursing into residential. And we had great issues with her going to residential because we were told that the people in residential had a certain amount of mobility, could, if they wanted, go in and make themselves a cup of tea in a small kitchen, and that, in their opinion, my mother only needed one person to help her, but she couldn't manage on her own. So being in residential, she wouldn't have had the one person there with her. And we tried to get the home themselves to move her back to nursing care. And they said no. And then I approached the social worker who initially helped my mother to get the placement. And she said she would have a word in the nursing home, and they said no. We think she's fine in residential.
But she did move to nursing, and that's where she was.
Yes.
When the pandemic hit.
Yes.
And did she have her own room?
She had her own room, yes.
And could you tell us about her hearing, please?
Yes. When my mother was a child, she developed a bad ear infection, and she remembers that her relatives, her parents, took her to the local doctor at the time, and he told her that the infection, although she didn't feel anything, had been there for some time, and that it might affect her hearing as she got older, but she subsequently lost all hearing
in that ear.
In that ear. And at one stage, when she was maybe in her 70s, they took her in and completely sealed the eardrum, so she had no hearing in that ear, and she wore a hearing aid in the other ear.
And is it right that she was very good at lip reading, although
Excellent.
her hearing wasn't very good?
Yes, yes.
She relied on that to understand.
She did quite a bit of the time. She relied on looking face to face at us.
And just continuing with her health generally, she was never diagnosed with dementia, but is it right that you suspected that she might have mild dementia?
Yes, we suspected that she had what I suppose we would have termed older age, possibly forgetfulness, but it wasn't noticeable when her own immediate family came in to see her. She noticed everything about us. She recognised things. She knew the grandchildren when they came in. She may not have remembered who was in 3 or 4 days before it, but she was alert and, knew what she was eating. She knew things that were going on a day-to-day basis, and she recognised the staff.
So she knew the staff. She recognised her children, and is it right that she had 7? You've got
Yes.
7 children and 13 grandchildren.
That's right.
And although she did have some memory issues, when the grandchildren came to visit her, she
Yes.
recognised them.
Yes.
And she was able to remember who'd been to see her that day.
Yes.
Noticed small changes like haircuts and things.
Yes, small changes like haircuts. If you had something that you hadn't seen before, a new outfit, something like that, she loved to get the newspaper brought in, and she would read that in between visits of the daytime and the evening. And when you were in the next visit, she would tell you something that she had read out of the paper. So although at an advanced age, she was fairly with it.
And in the 2 years that she was in the care home before the pandemic hit, is it right that her many grandchildren and children visited her on a daily basis?
Possibly not on a daily basis, because most of them worked during the day. The ones who were available just dropped in and out. It was open visiting, so they didn't have to wait to visiting hours. They dropped in and out for 10 minutes, went around to see her, either in the sitting room or in her bedroom, and all seemed happy with her. She would tell us who was in, and they were just delighted to see her.
Did your mother enjoy those visits?
She did. She did.
Your mother was quite a quiet person, is that right?
That's right.
Was she able to ask staff for things that she needed?
She was certainly able, but she possibly came from a generation where, you don't bother people if they're very busy. The nursing staff have lots to do in here, and unless this is something really important, she wouldn't have asked for help.
Whereas when her children came to visit, you or your siblings would ask
Yes.
the nursing staff for things on behalf of your mother.
Yes.
And is it right that she wasn't the best at eating?
Yeah,
In particular, I think they served rice quite a lot at the care
Yes.
home, which your mother wasn't greatly fond of.
No.
And so is it right that you and your siblings would bring cooked food for your mum that you knew that she liked?
Yes, not so much in terms of meals cooked, because I probably thought that wouldn't have been allowed. Things like yogurt, custard, things that we knew would boost either her lack of eating during the day, drinks, maybe a scone. Instead of her having the rice at night, which she didn't like, it was made quite in advance and it wasn't very appetizing. We would bring her in. We also brought in tea. She didn't like the tea because she told the staff initially when she went there she didn't like a lot of milk in her tea, but they would continue to pour in half a cup of milk and then top it up with tea. So she would leave it sitting and wouldn't drink it. So we brought in the tea bags and made the tea in the home and brought it down to her, and she absolutely took it. But that only happened when her own family came in.
And was she fond of tea that you brought in?
Yes, she was.
The home that your mother was in closed down fairly early, is that right? When the pandemic hit in March,
Yes.
you were informed that there would be no visits and the home was closed.
It closed on the 18th of March, and I was informed by a phone call. And on that particular day, my brother, who lived with my mother, was on his way to the home. He went every day, and he would always stop at the local shop and go in and get her, fresh, chilled drinks, yogurts, maybe biscuits, the usual things, and bananas, things that he knew that if she didn't eat the tea, he obviously wasn't giving them to her before she had her meals. He was waiting to see had she eaten during the day, and then he would give her. And the home rang me while I was collecting grandchildren at our local school. And I said, but my brother's actually on his way and he will be there any moment. And they said, no, you have to phone him and tell him that he can't come in. Now, this was minutes after the home officially closed to the public. And I said, but could you let him in just to give in the things that he has bought? And they said no.
Did they give you much more information than that?
Not at the time. They just said, we'll monitor it as it goes along. This hopefully won't last. And I immediately was concerned that if it went on any longer than 2 or 3 weeks, even at that stage, that my mother would go downhill, because you know your own mother best and you know what affects her. If she was resilient and outgoing and asking lots of questions, I probably wouldn't have been so doubtful. But knowing her personality and knowing that she wasn't a big eater, my fear was that without seeing a family member, any family member or even just one, that she would deteriorate.
Was that a conversation you had with the home?
Well, I didn't for the first week or so, because at this stage we all very blindly thought that we would get back in. We thought, as time goes on, surely someone will get in, because I'd never heard of a situation where a relative couldn't visit someone ongoing and no word of when they would change things. And initially they didn't say anything about when they thought it would change, but we didn't hear anything for weeks. We just rang the home.
The home was closed for a while. Did you get much information from the home as to how your mother was doing?
No. We didn't get any information unless we rang different family members. So instead of us all ringing and asking the same questions, myself and my brother, who did live with my mother at home, were the usual two that rang. And then we would ring each other and see, you know, that. So they basically said, your mother's fine, she's sitting in her room, or she's, you know. And at one stage I asked, is she eating? And the nurse, her reply was, well, you know, your mother's not a big eater anyway. And I said, yes, but with us coming in, we have helped her to nourish her with healthy foods, not bringing her in junk or things like that, but bringing her in healthy foods. And without us getting into the home, we're concerned.
Did they suggest that you could bring some food in for her?
No.
If you and your siblings weren't ringing the home, were you getting any information from them?
No.
Did you get any policy documents or
We got no policy documents.
any explanation as to what was going on?
No, absolute none, nothing. Nothing in writing and nothing by phone.
Did you feel like you really understood how your mother was doing?
No, I spent every day wondering how she was doing, because the same response was given. Should I phone during the day or should I phone at night? Which of these cases am I going to get more information? And it was virtually the same, regardless of whether it was during the day. The staff would change over at 8 o'clock, and the night staff would say, well, I'm only in, so I can't really tell you an awful lot. But surely there's a passing on of information from the daytime staff to the nighttime staff. And no, we weren't given any information.
And is it right that the home had changed hands
Yes.
during this time? And so you presume that there was also a change of staff, but were you told about this and who new staff were?
No, we weren't told that there was a change of hands. I received a letter. Probably on behalf of the rest of the family, and I actually have the letter here. The letter changed from. Sorry. The letter, the home changed hands, and we weren't told by the home. I got a letter to state this, and that they had said in the letter that due to COVID restrictions, visitors would not be allowed into the home, with the exceptions of end-of-life care.
And I think you say in your statement also that with the change and with COVID happening, you noticed that there were more agency and bank staff. Is that right?
Yes, and the only reason I know that, without being in the home and without being told that there will be other staff members, when I rang up, the names that I was given from the person answering the phone were not the names that we knew from when we were in visiting.
And therefore not the staff that your mother knew either?
Yes, that's right.
And is it right that you were phoning the home every day to check on your mother?
Yeah.
And you were just always told she's in her room, she's fine?
Yeah.
One of the other concerns that you had was that her chair was in a place in her room which was quite some distance from the buzzer, which she would have to ring if she needed help.
Yes.
Do you know if that changed at all?
Well, the only reason I know that is because I was in the home on an occasion before COVID, and my mother, I think maybe she just hadn't been feeling well one day, and they had set her out in her armchair. They normally would have taken her to the day room and sat with all the other residents. And on this particular day, she was sitting at the chair at the window, and the buzzer was on the opposite side of the room. Now, I'm assuming that in some instances a connection can be made to lengthen the buzzer to have it near her. But on the occasion that I was there, that wasn't the case. And I feared that if she had wanted to call a nurse, she had no means of doing so.
Can I ask you about Mother's Day? It was Sunday the 29th.
Yes.
You asked if you could go and see her, and you were allowed to see her through her window, is that right?
That's right.
So they brought her into her sitting room. And is it right that your mother was waving at you and trying to ask you to come into the room?
Yes, she was, yeah.
You tried to get her to understand that you couldn't and why you couldn't. Did she understand why you couldn't come in and see her?
My firm belief is that 100% she didn't understand. She was waving me to come in, and I was having to shake my head because there was a very top window open with all the residents sitting underneath it. No member of staff came in and stood with her in the room to explain to her that I couldn't come in. She wouldn't have understood COVID, but I subsequently gave her a Mother's Day card and wrote on it that there was a bad flu and that I couldn't come in, but I was hoping to be in soon, and that I had to leave it like that because I didn't know, and I thought it sounded better to say. I knew she could read the card, and I knew that it might give her hope if she felt that at least someone is going to come in to see me soon. So I subsequently gave in the items to the home.
And was anything suggested in terms of remote calling, FaceTime or anything like that for you to be able to keep in touch with your mother?
No FaceTiming or remote call. One nurse did suggest her bringing, again, a nurse that I had never known or heard tell of, bringing her phone down to my mother, and she suggested that maybe we could FaceTime. But we felt that my mother's hearing wasn't good enough, and that seeing us on the phone and not being able to hear us, it would have been confusing for her. So we didn't do it.
And was there also a suggestion, or was this the same occasion that you've just described, where a nurse had suggested using an iPad?
Yes, I think one of the staff did suggest using an iPad. My mother, given her age, was not familiar with technology. She would have used the phone quite a bit at home, and while she had her hearing aid in, she was able to hear us quite well on the phone. But we didn't get the opportunity to phone her. No one made the suggestion, and it just didn't happen.
And you talk in your statement about the terrible impact that not having those visits from her family must have had on your mother. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Well, I felt she would have felt abandoned. That's the only way that I can view it. She would have been used to daily visits during the day and at night, and if she needed something, she knew that her family were there to back up what she maybe felt she couldn't relate to the staff, or in some cases thought the staff were too busy. She would tell us. On a couple of occasions, her hearing aid broke down, and my brother took it off, had it fixed, brought it straight back. She would have done without the hearing aid, maybe rather than ask someone in the home, can you fix this for me, or can you send this off? Without seeing familiar faces like ourselves, she didn't sit generally in large group sittings. She went up to bed every day during the day for an hour, got up again, and then the staff would put her back to bed at night for us coming in. So we were able to sit in her room one-to-one. She was a private person who probably didn't like to speak in front of lots of other people in the room. So we had one-to-one with her. We sat beside her bed and just chatted away for any length of time. There was no cut off time to go home, apart from obviously not overstaying past 9 o'clock. And I felt that when I phoned, first of all, and inquired about her, they said, your mother's in her room. I felt, is she in her room every day sitting? After a while, she's bound to have had an impact on not seeing familiar faces and faces of her family.
So you were worried about her day-to-day needs perhaps not being met because
Yes.
she wasn't one of those people who felt like she could actively ask for it, and you were worried about her degree of social contact.
Yes, she would have asked the nurse who would have been in, maybe working with her in the room. She would have told her if she'd had pain, but she wouldn't have actively sought them in the home unless they were near her.
Yes. There was an occasion at the start of April where you spoke to the home and you were told that your mother had a cough, and you offered to go to the pharmacy and get the prescription and bring it to the home. Is
Yes,
that right?
that's right.
And when you turned up at the home, you were in full PPE. Was the nurse who took the items from you in full PPE?
No, the nurse came to the door, and she was one of the nurses who had been there she'd been there certainly from when my mother went there. She came to the door and opened it, and her first words were, "You can't come in." And I said, "No, I know that." And I gave her the medicine, and she was wearing her uniform. She wasn't wearing a mask, and she had an apron, plastic apron.
You say that looking back, there was a lady in the care home who had dementia, and you think that perhaps your mother got COVID from her. Is it right that this lady with dementia, she would walk in and out of rooms, be wandering corridors?
Yes.
And your view was that the staff weren't effectively able to isolate her?
It seemed like they couldn't isolate her because she was constantly walking around. And my mother was a little bit afraid, maybe is the right word. And so I spoke to one of the staff at supper time one night and expressed that my mother was a little bit concerned. The lady wasn't doing any harm, I have to add, but she was wandering in and out. And the person I spoke to said, "Well, you know she has dementia. There's nothing we can do about it." And that was that.
And is it right that that lady passed away a week or two after your mother did?
Yes.
On the 7th of April 2020, the home rang to say that they suspected that your mother may have COVID. Is that right?
Yes, they rang to say that my mother felt clammy and had a little bit of a cough.
They said that they were going to isolate her in her room.
Yes, that's right.
And when you asked whether that meant that staff would still go in and out, they said yes.
Yes, they said the staff would go in and out, but they wouldn't be fully gowned.
So they said they'd be wearing aprons and gloves, is that right? But not be fully covered up in PPE?
Yes.
Did they give you an explanation as to why they weren't going to be wearing full
No.
PPE?
No, I'm assuming that at that stage they didn't have PPE.
And then a day or two later, they confirmed that your mother did in fact have COVID.
Yes.
A critical care team arrived, and they had her on oxygen. You spoke to the doctor, is that right?
Yes, the doctor rang me from the home, and that was the first indication that I knew that when the result came back that my mother indeed had COVID. And they said her oxygen levels were falling, and they would, I think it was called the critical care team, they would administer oxygen when needed, and that they would come back to the home the following day. And I said at this point, can I get in to see my mother? Can any of her children get in? And she said, well, the home are saying no, but I will go and ask. And she did go and ask and returned and said, just her immediate family can come to the home in the evening time, not that evening, but 2 evenings later, and you can go outside into the courtyard and see your mother through the window.
And is it right that the 7 of you took it in turns to go up to the window and
Yes.
and see your mother? And what was your mother's response on seeing you?
Well, my mother, we were shocked, but my mother was wheeled over to near the window. A member of staff was fully covered in PPE in the room, and my mother's bed was taken from that side of the room to the side where the window was, and she had an oxygen mask on her. And the first person that went in, whichever one of my siblings first went in, from that until the last one went in, she smiled at each one and told the nurse their name.
And is it right that that was the last time you saw your mother?
Yes.
After that, you carried on ringing to see how she was doing?
I inquired again, could I go in? And they said no. And I said, look, if I can get PPE myself, can I go in and go out to the courtyard and see her through the window as we previously had done? And they said, no, there's no visits allowed.
Did they say why you couldn't see her from the courtyard?
Didn't give a reason, but I think they were still using it's the public health, it's not us argument.
Was there any discussion with you or your siblings about palliative care or end-of-life care?
No, there was no discussion from, well, yes, when we heard she had COVID, I suppose we're just like everyone else. You hope that she will recover from it. And as days went on, she stayed much the same. She didn't go downhill in a matter of a couple of days. She rallied for a bit with low oxygen levels. And then I rang the home one day to see how the acute care team returned to see how she was. And the person who answered the phone, the nursing person, said, no, we can do that ourselves. And I said, no, well, it's just that the acute care team informed me that they would return to the home and they would subsequently let me know how she was doing with her oxygen levels, how she looked, if in their opinion she was in danger. And they said, oh, no, we can do that.
And is it right that you asked the home to let you know if things went downhill?
Yes.
And you received a phone call early on Easter Sunday, which was the 12th of April.
Yes.
To say that your mother had passed away.
Yes. Now, I had rang the home the previous night on the Saturday night. Different members of my family had rang throughout Saturday, and everyone was told she's sleeping, she's okay, she's sleeping, she's a little bit clammy. But as the day staff were about to change their shift, I rang before they changed their shift, and I said, I would like to see my mother, but I also want to be informed about how she is. I want to know if she's getting worse. And I don't mind at what time of the night someone rings me, but I will be available, and I would like to be able to come up to the home and see her.
But
And she assured me that there would be 2 members of staff on that night, and that I could ring them any time I wanted.
But you didn't receive a call until...
No, I didn't
The
receive
one
any
saying that
call.
she'd
I
died.
rang. The latest that I felt I wanted to ring was about 11 p.m. and they said, "Oh, your mother's sleeping. She's the same as she was earlier on. She's not eating. She's just taking sips of water." And I suppose because I heard that she was only taking sips of water, I just made the assumption that she's not very well. But no one told me that.
And when you received the call saying that she had passed, you asked whether anyone had been with her
Yes.
when she died.
Yes.
Had anyone been with her?
The nurse said no.
You asked if you could bring some clothes in for your
Yes.
mother after that. Were you able to do so?
No. We were told we weren't allowed to bring in any clothes and that we weren't able to come up to the home at any time of the day, and that they wouldn't be doing anything until the doctor had confirmed the death. So we just then subsequently contacted the funeral director.
And you give a very vivid description in your statement of going to the home, not really understanding what was going on,
Yep.
not being given any information, and then the undertaker coming, spending some time in the home and then taking your mother away, leaving all of you just standing there. The funeral took place the next day, is that right?
Yes, just going back to the undertaker did go to the home, and he had to wait around for quite some time before he was admitted inside. When he got in, himself and two other people who I believe he had to take with him to get my mother ready, if ready is the right word. And we expected to be called in when they had done that. We expected to be called into the home to see our mother for the last time, and to say our goodbyes, but
Were
after
you able
about...
to do that?
No, we weren't allowed to do that.
Thank you. And you attended the funeral the next day, and you said in your statement that there was no wake, that you were all outside, just the children spaced out.
Yeah.
And then she was taken to the church graveyard and wheeled in her coffin there. There was no mass, no
No.
service, just prayers with only 10 of you allowed at the graveyard.
That's right.
And afterwards, you all had to go home to your own houses.
That's right, yes. We obeyed the rules. We were only allowed to have 10 people, no grandchildren, no one else at the church. The priest said, you can only come over and stand, the immediate family have to stand spaced out around the grave. We did that, and no one else was present. So yes, there were just a few prayers said, and my mother's coffin was lowered into the ground. And then we went home to our own houses, and subsequently, I think the next day or 2 days later, the graveyards were closed. Now, in Ireland and in Northern Ireland, funerals are different. And I believe they're different to what they are in England insofar as we have what's called a 3-day wake. We have the day that the person's remains come home from a hospital or a nursing home. We have the next day where people call to offer support, to speak about the person who has passed away. And in our case, my mother had a very long life. So a lot of people would have had stories to tell. Her grandchildren would have loved to have compared stories. They still do. So yes, we were denied the opportunity of doing that, of meeting up. Neighbours couldn't come to the funeral, and they couldn't come to her house. And I can sum it up if I was trying to think of what my mother would have made of it. she would have been absolutely shocked to think that in her dying days and moments, she never saw a family member. She was totally reliant on the limited number of staff that were there, and try as I might, I can't imagine what went through her mind.
Thank you. And is it right that you went to the home a few weeks later to collect her belongings, and
Yes.
You had some concerns about the degree to which IPC measures were adopted in the home? And an example you give is that when you went to the home to collect her belongings, there were delivery people and workmen going in and out of the home without any PPE on. Is that right?
Yes. Well, I had to ring the home myself to ask could I come up and collect my mother's belongings. I didn't get a phone call about that. And they said we have to keep them here between a week and 6 weeks. That's the rules for COVID. And I said, that's fine. Sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt. You also mentioned that the home was short-staffed even before the pandemic.
Yes.
And you can imagine that it only would have got worse during the pandemic.
Yes, that's true.
And is it right that you also don't think that the home had much PPE?
Well, they didn't have any PPE until after my mother died. A local group were able to ask for funding, and the local group went round 5 or 6 nursing homes in the general area of where my mother was. In the city of Armagh itself, they went round and gave out PPE. Staffing from the day an hour my mother went in was an issue. Lack of. During the day, it wasn't too bad. But from 8 o'clock at night until morning time, there were times when there was one assistant. And on a night when we could breathe a sigh of relief going through the door, there were 2 care assistants. And what it meant when my mother needed the toilet, it became an issue to the extent that our blood pressure and our anxiety levels rose as we went through the door, because we knew as soon as we got in, our mother would ask us, I need to go to the toilet. We couldn't find. And she was in bed at this stage, so she needed an assistant or a nurse to get her up and help her out. We spoke to the manager about it. We spoke to the social worker about it. The social worker at first couldn't believe that I was telling her there was one assistant at night. And I don't know if anything changed, but it certainly couldn't have changed for the better.
Thank you. And just finally, obviously the home was having to follow guidance and was struggling with work, with workforce, staff numbers, and things like that. But do you think that the home did enough to care for your mother and to take into consideration your family's needs?
Well, if they were to say they were following guidelines, I don't understand any guideline that keeps a family member out from a dying parent in their last hours. If they didn't get in during COVID, that was bad enough. But end-of-life care, to me, is a human right. It's a right to be able to see your parent, sibling, whoever would be in a nursing home. And given the context of where my mother was placed in the home, I never needed to go near another resident. I could have gone in, round the back, in through the courtyard, and my mother's room was facing out, which is the place we went to see her when they told us she had COVID. So why keep people out? We're not going in to have parties. We're not going in to have fun. We're going in to see our dying relative. Why keep them out? Why were the inspections not carried out? Why was someone not going into the home and saying, you need to do this? The RQIA weren't in, the Public Health Authority weren't in. I don't know if my mother's room was cleaned. I don't know anything about what happened from the 18th of March until the 12th of April.
Thank you. We've covered quite a lot, but is there anything in particular that you would like
No,
to say?
I think we've covered
Thank you.
most of the issues.
Thank you very much for coming to assist the inquiry.
Thank you very much indeed for your help. I don't know, I can't remember if you were at the meeting when I first went to Northern Ireland to consult about the terms of reference.
I don't think I was.
But one of the very first things I learned from going around the country from bereaved family members was how different bereavement is during the time of a pandemic. And you're talking then about the 3-day wake that you would normally have. I mean, as I understand it, the 3-day wake, the idea is that you get your grief out, that you share the joy of the person's life, and that you do it as a group of loving family and friends.
That's right, Lady Helen. Yes, that's right.
Well, I've very much understood that point that people wish to make, and I'm really grateful to you for your help. I appreciate it. Can't have been easy.
No.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Lady Helen. Thank you, and thank you.
Right, we will sit later before lunch to try and finish the next witness before we break.
I'm grateful. Just pause just for a moment, my lady. Thank you. And if I may call Helen Hough, who's just making her way in now.
Don't trip over the step.
No, I'm recovering from a broken leg.
Oh no, oh Lord.
I know, yeah. Yeah, I've got a broken foot and a broken knee, but we're fine.
Are you okay to stand to take the oath?
Yes.
Right.
You're affirming, aren't you? Yes. I'm not, I'll do either. It's your choice. We're a Christian, I don't mind. Do you want to go on? Yeah, go on. You can hold that in your hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God
That the evidence I shall give.
that the evidence I shall give
Shall be the truth.
shall be the truth,
The whole truth.
the whole truth,
And nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth.
Thank you, please.
Thank you.
I'm sorry you're the last witness of the morning, but I promise you we'll sit on into the lunch hour so that you can complete your evidence before we break.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you very much for waiting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hough. You've helpfully provided a witness statement to the inquiry. For those following, that's INQ 0005877639. But you are here today to speak about your experiences of the pandemic in owning and managing a care home and your personal experiences involving your husband, Vernon. Is that right?
I am.
Thank you. At the time the pandemic began in January of 2020, you and your husband owned a nursing home in Wrexham. Is that the position?
Yes.
You have a background in nursing yourself.
Yes.
In fact, you come from a family tradition of nurses.
We do,
Your
I do.
mum, your sister, and you.
Yeah.
You purchased the property that was to become the nursing home back in 1987, and over time that's grown in size. It grew in size.
Yes.
It began with 22 residents and subsequently up to 40.
Yes.
There was a nursery as well in the grounds at one
Yes.
stage. Your sister ran that.
She did.
It was a family affair, effectively. You and your family have always lived on site.
Yes.
So it was both your home, but also your business.
Yes.
You worked within the home initially as well, doing far more nursing. Is that the position?
Yes.
And then over time, what happened?
So I when we first opened, I was there full time. My sister helped out working night shift, and my mum would do a few shifts. But over time, I took on more staff because the home became more, for want of a better word, bureaucratic. So there was a lot more paperwork to be done as an owner, manager, than there was in previous years. So I went down to about 3 shifts a week, and the rest of the time was in the office.
And just to get a sense of the size of the home, in terms of staffing, you had 12 trained nursing staff members. You had 35 carers, which would
Yes.
increase up to 45 during holiday periods. 5 domestic staff.
Yes.
2 activity coordinators for
Yeah.
the residents. 2 maintenance staff.
Yes.
5 kitchen staff.
Yeah.
And an administrator to help you with your duties in
Yes.
terms of management. And then also your husband, Vernon,
Yes.
took on a full-time role within the home too.
Yes.
He undertook maintenance, but also a lot of care in relation to the residents in terms of
did.
in terms of doing chores and different things for them.
Entertaining the
Entertaining them.
patients. Yes.
And so that's really the position as at the start of the pandemic.
Yes.
In terms of the home. Just touching on how you viewed those patients and residents within the home, how would you describe them to you?
Well, we were a nursing home, so we had very poorly patients. So on our ground floor, we had quite poorly patients. So it was a bit like very intensive nursing. Upstairs, they were less intensive nursing, and we did have a few patients that were classed as residential patients. In other words, they could self-care, but they were mainly there as a partner to somebody who'd, say, had a severe stroke and their husbands came in with them, or they came in because they were quite local and they wanted to come to us. I didn't have many residential patients. They were mainly, residential, classed as residential, but we categorised them all as patients, but some, about 4 or 5 were self-caring. The rest were all quite heavy nursing patients. And they were just like our extended family, really.
And in terms of Vernon's role in relation to your patients, can you just give an insight into what he would do?
His role before the pandemic, his role was he did all the general maintenance there, and he did the decorating and painted the gardens in particular. His father used to do the gardens when he was alive as well. And then he'd go out and do all the shopping for the cat. We had deliveries, but there were other things that we were getting here, there, and everywhere for specialised things that patients wanted. But he would also see to them having the patients have their newspapers, and if they wanted anything in particular, if they fancied fish and chips, he'd go and get it. But he did a lot of running around outside of the home as well as the maintenance in the home.
And I understand in relation to your patients within the home, you'd also take them out on day
Yes.
trips and things like that when possible.
He would take them up to the garden, to the polytunnel, where they would do lots of planting with the patients, those who were interested in gardening. But if we arranged day trips, we often arranged like trips on the canal in Llangollen and things. Then he would take them in the van, and he would accompany the carers who were taking the patients and to bring them back and arrange to ferry people back in too. He would also pick up day patients from their home and bring them back in. And he occasionally would take the odd patient up to the pub next door in a wheelchair if they fancied a drink in the pub or wherever. But we were there all the time.
Indeed. I'm now going to turn, if I may, to the outset of the pandemic, and you explain within your witness statement that you start to become aware of what is going on in China initially.
Yes, I was working a night shift, and I was reading on my phone from the Lancet that there was a possible SARS outbreak again in China coming our way, which at the time they were saying that it was like a bird flu and it wasn't passable to humans, which is the first time they said that as well. So we were aware that something was going on in China back really in November of 2019. And I became aware of, I was starting to pick up articles about this because I was a bit concerned that it was going to start coming across to Britain at some point. But we weren't fully aware of it coming to us really until about the February of 2020. And we were away at the time, and my son was going skiing, and he was concerned that he wasn't going to get back to Britain because Italy and Spain and places had already began to lock down. China was already locked down by this time.
If I can just pause you there, really, just to come back to the home itself. It was at
Yeah.
that point that you described that you began
I began getting
stockpiling your own PPE.
I began stockpiling then PPE. In the February, I thought, well, we're gonna start with another pandemic here.
It's right to say that you've had some experience
Yes.
in terms of infection control measures previously in relation to other outbreaks,
Yeah.
whether it's norovirus, seasonal flu, for example, which is
And the
obviously
swine
very-
flu a few
and
years
swine flu.
before. Yeah.
Now, in terms of official guidance and contact with local authorities and other organisations, in that respect, you had a meeting, do you recall, on the 10th of March?
I do.
So not long after you became more aware of it in late February.
Yes.
There was a meeting between you, the local authority, other care home providers,
Yeah.
GP cluster leads, so
Yeah.
effectively a health and adult social care meeting. And in relation to that meeting, that covered broad issues, is that right, in
Yes.
relation to recognising potential symptoms of COVID-19,
Yeah.
reducing any cross-infection, managing any potential outbreak within the home, and infection and prevention control. And I just want to bring up, if I may, paragraph 19 of your witness statement,
Yeah.
because within your statement you set out that you made a note at the time
Yeah.
of upsetting messages, as you described them, that you heard at that meeting. And I just want to go through them, if I may, with you briefly now. This is what you came away with, that firstly, older people will not be ventilated.
No.
Was that said in the meeting?
Yes. It was that older people would not be considered for ventilation, was their terms, yeah.
That second, and indeed you go on, and it goes on then to specify the care home population will not be considered for ventilation.
Yeah.
And is this your note here? In fact, there were virtually no admissions from care homes into hospitals at all.
Afterward, yeah.
After that,
After that point, yeah.
That's your experience
Yeah,
of
that
it
was
through
my
the pandemic.
Yeah.
And that then, in terms of access to medical care, one GP will be allocated per care home,
Yes.
with most consultations conducted over the telephone.
Yeah.
And indeed, in your experience was that following on from that, no general practitioner attended the care
From the
home
23rd
in
of
person
March. Yeah.
until well into 2021.
Yep.
And so it follows from that there were remote or video or
Yes.
telephone consultations.
Yes. Which unfortunately wasn't good in my care home. Because of the Wi-Fi coverage, it was quite poor.
We're going to come on to that later in a
Okay.
little bit more detail. But essentially, these were the messages that were being sent right at the outset
Yes.
of the pandemic to you as a care home manager.
Yeah.
Now, around this time also, there were policies being instituted in relation to the discharge of patients from hospitals into care homes.
Yeah.
And you set out within your statement your experiences in that regard.
Yes.
Now, you say that was not something that was unusual in and of itself,
No.
in that there were obviously established procedures in place for the discharge of hospital residents into your care home and had been for many years.
Yes.
It was effectively a regular occurrence.
Yes.
If you had a bed, and you'd be in contact with that hospital
It was
every
weekly.
week. Exactly, to see if you had any bed space available. So from around early March again, you were contacted then about potential free bed spaces
Yeah.
for, which would enable individuals to be discharged from hospital and free up the hospital's beds. In that regard, there was no mandatory or routine testing at that stage. What was your response?
My response was to the local health board was the only way I would accept any patients from the hospital would be if they came with a written negative COVID swab. And I wanted it in writing, that it come as a negative COVID swab. And the response I got was that may not be possible to do that. And I said, well, they don't come. And their response was they were going to report me to CIW for bed blocking.
Were you reported?
I don't know. I said, you can report me to who you want, but nobody's setting foot over my nursing home without a negative COVID swab.
And did
And they
that
didn't.
remain the position?
The whole time.
And so, in terms of the first patients from hospitals that would have been accepted into your care home, when roughly would that have been? Can you recall?
Well, where was
With
what,
a
sorry?
negative test.
Oh, that happened quite soon afterwards. That when we got patients coming in from there, I would say probably again March time when we were first having patients coming in, quite poorly patients by this time. They were having negative swabs. It was written down that they were tested negative for COVID before they came to me.
And was that before the rollout across Wales of the mandatory testing prior to hospital discharge, do you know?
I don't know. I don't know if it was before that. It probably was, because it was quite early on that as soon as we knew... I've got a friend who works in a hospital, and so we were saying, you know, she was on a ward where she was treating patients with COVID, so I knew that I didn't want anybody from hospital that tested positive with COVID.
And in your statement, you say that you were concerned
Yeah.
about the pressure being applied
I was.
on both you and other care homes.
Yeah.
What enabled you to say no?
Because I was an owner. I was an owner and a manager, and I did say to to the local health board, I hope you're not putting pressure on other homes like you are with me on managers, because managers may not be able to say, no, we're not going to take people with or we're not going to take people only with a negative swab. If you've got a homeowner that's got 8 empty beds, then the owner may say, we want them filled, regardless. Whereas I had the choice to say, no, they're not coming into my home. I'm not sure that every manager had that choice. I don't know, but I did say that to public health, to the local health board.
Thank you.
That I hope they weren't putting that pressure on them.
Now, I want to turn now to the subject of infection prevention control guidance. That was also something that was discussed at that 10th of March meeting.
Yeah.
But just dealing with how that guidance developed, and firstly, how realistic it was. Aspects of it were social distancing, as you set out.
Yeah.
You advised that you had to remain 2 metres apart.
Yeah.
Was that realistic in
No.
your care home, in your nursing?
No, it's impossible. To begin with, you can't move anybody on your own. You can't nurse a patient without touching them. But also you need 2 carers. If you're moving a patient safely, you need at least 2 carers with every patient to be able to move them. And they're going to be less than 2 metres apart. I mean, we were advised at one time that their recreational room, which was outside, their chairs should be situated 2 metres apart outside. And then when they came in the home, they're in the same room handling the same patient. The guidance was nonsensical, really.
You explained that much of the IPC measures that were put in place within your nursing home were as a consequence, effectively, of your previous experience and
Yes.
training
Yes.
in relation to infection control.
Yes.
Just picking up on one of the practical consequences of that within the home, you split the nursing home into 3 separate sections and
Yeah.
areas, is that right?
Yeah, 3 zones.
And you had a red zone and
Yeah.
a green zone,
Yeah.
or they were designated red and
Yes.
green. Red zones were where people with any symptoms of COVID or suspected COVID were moved to.
Yeah.
And then the green zones, obviously, business as normal, effectively,
Yes.
within the nursing home. In terms of the staffing of those areas, were there designated staff that would only work in the red zones
Yeah.
and only work in the green zones?
Yes.
And I understand that it was only you and Vernon that would cross between them.
Yes.
And that was because you had the capacity to change your clothes
Yes.
effectively and shower and take those precautions. With regard to the red zone, after a patient was moved out of a room and into the red zone, what did you do with their room?
Their room, I mean, we didn't have testing there, so if they had symptoms during COVID, when we did have testing, if they were in that area, then they would, they didn't always pass away with COVID. So some patients didn't. But before we had the testing, if they developed any sort of symptoms of what we thought were COVID, then they stayed in that red zone until those symptoms were well and truly past. And that could be for up to a month. But I did have poorly patients, obviously, that died in that red zone. My problem was that patients soon became aware of this area, and they didn't really want to move their own bedrooms. It's their home. They didn't want to move to that area because they also realised patients weren't coming from that area. So they were a bit reluctant to move into that zone.
And you explained that became particularly difficult
Yeah.
after testing was instituted and people were asymptomatic,
Exactly.
presenting with no symptoms.
Exactly, because we realised after testing that we could have had potentially have patients in the green zone that were COVID positive.
And in terms of isolating them in their own rooms,
Yeah.
did that pose practical challenges?
Definitely.
And what were those? If you could just give us an
Because
insight.
everything, where the patients are in communal areas, you needed less staff to observe what the patients were doing. Most patients are encouraged to get up at most days. There are obviously poorly patients that couldn't, but most patients were in communal rooms. When we decided that it was safer to keep them in their individual rooms, it took a lot more staff to be able to take their feeds in there, to feed certain patients, to take their food. So it had to be done. Once you'd move from one area, then sometimes we'd have to take some staff off there to go to another area to do all the feeds. You could be doing 12 to 15 feeds for patients who couldn't feed themselves. So it took a lot more staff rather than being in a communal dining room. So staffing-wise, it posed a massive problem.
Indeed, and we're going to come on to the staffing
Yeah.
difficulties that you experienced
Yeah.
in due course. But just turning then to staff and their facilities, I understand you also had a dirty changing room
Yeah.
for them to be able to change in and out of their clothes,
Yeah.
and that then their clothes would be laundered
Yes.
at the nursing home, so
Yeah.
they would remain there. In terms of ventilation within your nursing home, you explained that the nature of the building posed its own challenges in that regard.
Yeah.
In the first wave, it was relatively straightforward because you could have the windows open,
That's
the doors
right.
open, it was spring, summer. But as it got to winter, was that possible?
We did ventilate the rooms as best we could, but no. You can't have the windows wide open when it's very cold outside because of the risk of them getting hypothermia. So it was very difficult to ventilate rooms. Once a patient had left a room, we could deep cleanse a room and ventilate it when a patient had left a room. But while they were in, ventilation was difficult.
Now, I want to just ask you about access to suitable personal protective equipment, PPE.
Yeah.
As we've been referring to it, for both the staff that you employed and also your residents. You explained that at the beginning you began to stockpile it.
Yes.
You ordinarily have some, but not
Yeah.
significant quantities.
No.
Is it right that within the nursing home itself, you got through a huge amount of PPE because of the nature of the services that you were providing?
Yes. Yeah.
In terms of your carers, they were all trained by the nursing staff
Yes.
and you in relation to how to
Yes.
how to use that PPE appropriately and correctly. With regard to supplies, you encountered difficulties yourself from your ordinary suppliers, is that right?
I did.
And what happened there?
They told when we were after the lockdown, they told us that they couldn't supply to us anymore because they were only supplying Public Health England. And I did. Fortunately, I knew the owner of the company because when he was first setting up in business, he came to me personally, and I supported his business throughout. And I spoke to him directly, and he did agree to send us PPE. But he said, "But I can't do this for other homes." I don't know what happened in other homes, but that's how I got mine, only by knowing the owner of the company.
And even with that supply, you were still significantly short.
I bought a lot of things off Amazon.
Yes. Amazon and DIY shops,
Yeah.
local DIY stores. You were also assisted by the local community, as
Yeah,
I
we
understand
were.
it, in terms
Yeah.
of them making thicker gowns, masks,
Yes.
theatre gowns, effectively, arms
Yeah.
coverings,
Yeah.
and other aspects that you sought and
Yeah.
they gratefully supplied.
Yeah, the village, the people who were from the village and also carers' relatives made us full masks with a filter in between them, and the operation gowns from old duvet covers that I supplied. Yeah.
You explain that in terms of the local authority, they provided some surgical masks, plastic aprons and gloves, but also on one occasion provided goggles.
Yeah.
And the inquiry's heard already in earlier modules and indeed from experts in relation to the fit not always being appropriate for the workforce.
Yeah.
Did you find that those goggles were similarly not
Yes.
fit for purpose in relation to your female staff?
The first lot of goggles we were given, they were in a box. There was 600 pairs, and they didn't fit the staff at all. So Vernon drilled every set of goggles so we could thread elastic through them at the back to keep them tight to their eyes and fit their head. So we drilled every single one of them. And then it was either a month or 6 weeks later, we were told that they were inappropriate, they didn't work, so we were to throw them all away.
And then you also, separately to that, had visors made by a local factory.
A local factory made us visors, yeah.
In terms of costs, you touch upon this within your statement. You explain that the costs of PPE effectively skyrocketed.
Absolutely. Yeah. A box of gloves went from being £1 for 100 to £10 and more.
Thank you. Dealing now, if I may, with testing for your staff and for your residents. Again, you were given details of testing arrangements initially on that 10th of March meeting.
Yeah.
That it would be managed by Public Health Wales on a telephone booking appointment system. And that in terms of that, you were having to send your staff to testing centres initially, but soon after that, tests were withdrawn.
Yes.
Because they were being prioritised at the time, effectively, for the hospitals.
Well, we didn't know why they were closed down. So we had drive-through testing centres quite local to us, and then all of a sudden they closed. So we were having to send staff who were symptomatic to test centres because they would only test people who were symptomatic. One member, they were having to go into England, and one member of staff drove to Manchester Airport to get tested because there were no test facilities in Wales. And if you looked for it online where you could get a test, it would say every single day, no tests available.
I want to just deal, if I may, with a very practical difficulty that arose in relation to your patients.
Yeah.
When you considered that they needed a test, you explained the process as was set out by Public Health Wales, that you'd contact the GP to arrange that, and then that in due course a testing kit and swab would be brought to you.
Yeah.
But that typically took 48 hours to arrive. What was the real life consequence of that?
Well, if you've got a very poorly patient, and especially if it's on a weekend, it would take longer on a weekend. But if you got somebody who was poorly, then usually by the time Public Health Wales or the local health board brought one to the home, then they were dead. Because it just took too long to get them. And I did ask on one occasion, could I use that swab to test another patient? And they said to me, no, they're all got their names and written on them. And I said, what happens to it now? And they said they'd be disposed of.
So it simply could not be used?
No, couldn't be used for anybody else.
Now, in relation to testing, you wrote to various politicians. And local assembly members on a number of occasions, urging effectively wider scale testing to be extended to all care home residents and staff. I just want to bring up, if I may, one of the emails that you sent on the 4th of May. It's the INQ 598472. This is one of the emails, as I say, that you sent, and this is your response in due course. This is dated the 4th of May. And you set out this here, don't you?
Yeah.
Because what you say is, your evidence is showing the very elderly can be asymptomatic until they become suddenly very ill. And then they do not survive longer than 48 hours. And so and you explain, you ask for the test, it takes 36 to 48 hours, and by that time the patient is dead. The swab is wasted. And importantly, what then happens is that person is not recorded as having COVID-19 because they've never been tested.
No.
Thank you. I'm going to turn now if I may, back to the situation involving the deaths of residents within your home. And you explained that in terms of the pre-pandemic position, it was not unusual. You'd have
Yes.
a couple of deaths a month from natural causes, and you've explained why that is. It's
Yes.
owing to the cohort of people that you look after.
Yes.
And reflected that demographic. With regard to the pandemic, you explain within your statement that the types of patients that you often had changed,
Yes.
and that they were much closer to end of life
Yes.
themselves, and were deteriorating rapidly,
Yeah.
and consequently, the number of deaths that you and your colleagues experienced rose significantly
Yes,
during
they
that
did.
time. Do you recall the first death of a COVID-19 positive patient of yours?
I do.
Can I just ask you some details about that, if I may? On that occasion, I understand that it was an elderly gentleman who had
No,
become,
lady.
a lady. Oh, my apologies.
Yeah.
A lady who'd become unwell,
Yeah.
and that you requested a test again
Yeah.
from Public Health Wales, as we've already been
Yeah.
through. That test subsequently came too late
Yeah.
in the day. But I want to concentrate, if I may, upon your requests for medical assistance
Yeah.
and oxygen in particular.
Yeah.
Her oxygen levels were low,
Yes.
and you sought a prescription, is that right?
That's right.
And what response did you get?
This lady became quite poorly very quickly. She was a very fit lady, and I noticed she became quite poorly. Her temperature was rising, and she did start with a bit of a cough. So we rang the GP. Of course, with the Wi-Fi, we couldn't get an accurate picture because the Wi-Fi would break up, so she couldn't see her. So I said to the GP, she was a locum GP, she wasn't a local GP, and I said, I need some oxygen for this lady and some antibiotics. So she prescribed the antibiotics, and she did say to me, how do I do the oxygen? So I said, well, you write me a prescription, we come and pick it up, then we take it to the chemist, and then we get some oxygen, or whichever body where we take the prescription to, and we get the oxygen. So she said that, well, the prescriptions will be here tonight. So we picked up the prescription from the GP's practice. By this time it was 6 o'clock, so everywhere was closed. So I couldn't get any oxygen. So the very next day I rang her own GP, who was then back on duty. And I said the same thing to them. This lady's deteriorating overnight. She's very poorly. I need some oxygen. We've picked up the antibiotics. I need the oxygen. I need it ASAP because our oxygen levels are dropping down. And she prescribed end-of-life drugs. And we never, ever got the oxygen, ever.
Indeed, you deal with more generally the issue of oxygen within your statement, explaining.
Yes, the sad thing with this lady is, and it's hard because we knew this was our first. She was.
Try having a drink of water. I don't sometimes help me.
She was our first COVID death. And she was a lovely lady. Vernon had to go in the room. And she just said, help me, Vernon, help me, I can't breathe, because we couldn't open the window for it. And I just made him get out, because he'd never seen anything like this. We'd never seen anything. It was literally, she was literally gasping for air. And we couldn't do anything. We didn't have anything to give her. But he got very distressed, but not as distressed as her. But she... So it was literally like taking a fish out of water, and they suffocated and they couldn't breathe. And without that relief of the oxygen, although it's little, we knew there was not much we could do, but there was no relief for this woman. It was horrific, and unfortunately, Vern saw that. He didn't get involved with the death of patients, but that was horrific, and she was just begging him for help. But yeah, it was. By the time we got the swab for her, she'd gone. She'd died, unfortunately, horrifically.
Indeed. And in your statement, you set out how important oxygen often is in providing that comfort effectively.
Yeah, it did give them relief, yeah.
And just, if I may, just draw that document back up on screen, your email. You make that point very forcefully there. It's the one that ends 598472. You explain that you have no oxygen generally on site because it was decided a few years ago that you could not keep it there, even for emergencies.
No.
It had to be prescribed. But instead of GPs prescribing it, they give you end-of-life drugs instead.
Yeah.
You explain that relatives would be horrified.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how easily it was.
Indeed. And you go on to provide a very vivid description below that, which is as a patient's oxygen saturation level drops with this disease, with COVID, they're gasping for breath, and you cannot give any oxygen relief at all.
No.
And as that's the only treatment for COVID-19, you found that disgraceful because it's obviously available at hospitals.
Yeah.
Touching then on and continuing on down, you explain that paramedics do not want to admit from care homes.
No.
Any of those showing COVID-19 symptoms. Was that your experience in terms of your patients within the home?
Yeah.
At that point, they were left with no oxygen relief or any further treatment.
This lady as well she didn't get swabbed, so she wasn't counted as one of the numbers, and I knew it was COVID.
In general terms, with regard to access to healthcare and hospital treatment, did you experience any other, just moving on to that general topic now, if I may?
Yeah.
You also had experience of patients with unrelated COVID, unrelated illnesses to COVID-19.
Yes.
Who ambulances refused initially to take to hospital.
Yes.
That was involving diabetes, with blood sugar levels lowering.
Yeah.
But also where a patient of yours fell and received a fracture.
Yes. Yeah. With the case of the gentleman, he came in for respite care. He was waiting for an operation, and he developed an infection, so he'd got a slight temperature. So the ambulance men said because he got a slight temperature when they came, because he was semi-comatose because of his diabetes, and we can give glucose as a nurse, but I can't. We can give insulin if they're hyper, but if they're hypo, I can't give intravenous glucose. So without getting GPs there, we rang an ambulance. Well, the GP told me to ring an ambulance. So the paramedics came, and because he got a slight temperature, obviously, because he got an infection, they refused to take him. And it took me 3 hours to argue for him to be admitted into hospital. And the ambulance was outside for 3 hours until somebody from ambulance headquarters admitted to take him in. And they said to me, they weren't local ambulance men, I don't know where they were from, but they said to me, the hospital aren't going to be very pleased with this. And I went outside the building and I did say to the ambulance men, it's not up to you to play God here. You're just taking in poorly patients into hospital. You don't get to decide, unfortunately, who lives or dies in this home. But they weren't very pleased with me, but that was how I felt. I felt that nobody's speaking up for my patients.
Thank you. And I just want to move to a related topic, which is do not attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation notices. And you explain in your statement that all GPs have put in place DNA CPRs on their patients. Was that all of your patients in the care home?
Yeah. Yes. I came back from a meeting and 50% of them had already had the paperwork in place because they'd been sent to them, and then they had all had DNRs in place.
And was there, to your knowledge, any consultation
No.
with the patient or their families?
No. I managed to speak to some of the patients' relatives before this was slightly before lockdown this was happening. This was before lockdown. And two of the relatives, I managed to get in touch with them, and they got hold of their GP, and it was removed because they didn't agree with it. They spoke to their parents about it, and they didn't want it in place either, and it was removed. That's the only two.
Prior to lockdown, if there were those notices in place, would nonetheless that individual be taken to hospital if necessary?
If what, sorry?
If there was a notice in place
Yes.
For an individual patient of yours,
Yes.
would they nonetheless be taken to hospital
Yes.
for treatment?
Yes.
Did you see any change in that during the pandemic?
Yes. We found that ambulance drivers and paramedics were not happy to transport any patients to hospital if that needs, like when that lady fell, unless there was a DNR in place. Okay. And I'd never come across that before. So that was a relatively new consequence to me.
Thank you. I now want to move on, if I may, you've touched upon the impact upon your patients already within the home. Obviously, things were significantly restricted. Did you see any decline in their mental, cognitive and physical abilities as a consequence?
Of being isolated?
Of being isolated.
Yeah, what we did was those who could, we gave them all, or I asked the relatives to bring in individual mobile phones so they could speak to them over the phone, because we didn't, as I say, we didn't have very good Wi-Fi, so they couldn't FaceTime anybody or their relatives. But yes, they became quite sad and isolated. But I must admit, they knew what was going on. Even though my patients were quite poorly, I didn't have many with dementia. Mm. So they knew what was going on, and they were quite happy to be isolated from other patients. But their mental health did suffer because of that.
Of course. And you explain, and I'm not going to go through it in detail, the various steps you took to try to ensure that people could have visits, including effectively building an atrium-type visiting booth so that individuals could come.
That was during the second wave.
Indeed, during the second wave, so they could speak to their relatives and have those visits.
Yeah.
And in terms of your staff and the impact on your staff, how would you describe that?
They were terrified. They worked non-stop. Those that could. There was some that they couldn't come to work anymore because they were shielding. They had relatives of their own at home that they were protecting. So a lot of staff then went off to be furloughed, really, because they couldn't do that. But people with young children, they were terrified. They didn't know who'd got COVID, who hadn't got COVID, if they were taking it home to their families. So we had a caravan on site, so a lot of staff, and we had an annex upstairs, an attic upstairs. So a lot of the staff didn't go home at all till their days off. So they came on duty and worked their shift, and then they slept on site, and then they came back to work until their days off, and then they would leave everything behind and go home, so they didn't risk taking it home. But they were all absolutely terrified. And but as I say, they worked so hard. But after we lost that patient, they became increasingly worried, because we knew that was an abnormal death, and we knew it wasn't a normal average death. And so we knew this lady had got COVID. So a lot more staff went off that had got young children who were frightened. And at one time there, because it was spring and summer as well, we had a lot of hay fever sufferers. Of course, because we got no testing at all, if they got the slightest sniffle, they weren't allowed in. So in 1 week alone, I had 15 staff off with hay fever symptoms, but I couldn't get any of them tested.
Indeed. And just dealing with those staff shortages, I understand that where staff were unable to work, that you or other members of staff would effectively be picking up those shifts, working double shifts,
we
all the additional
were working
shifts.
16, 20 hours,
because you effectively had a permanent cohort of staff.
Yes.
You did not use agency staff at any point during the pandemic.
No.
One of the other points that you raise in relation to the staff shortages is related to childcare, and where you had problems with schools not accepting that your workers were key workers.
Yeah.
All of which obviously pointed to a very, very pressurised, difficult, challenging time in relation to staffing.
Yeah.
I want to, if I may, just turn now to the impact on you and your husband at that time. And as I say, you set that out within your statement. You explained that by this point, by later in the pandemic, you were working 16-hour days.
Yeah.
And that was quite normal. You were up early.
Yeah.
You'd often be up in the evenings, in the night time. You would be there if there was a death at night. It would fall to you to record that.
Yeah.
And Vernon would be dealing with various building problems and different issues that arose in that regard too.
Yeah.
So the two of you were working under intense pressure and lengthy hours with no respite.
No.
In terms of those pressures, with regard to Vernon, how did that period from the February period of time to the May of 2020 impact upon him?
Unfortunately, his workload increased dramatically because trying to get supplies in, he was having to queue, at supermarkets and the cash and carry and things. Everything took so much longer. One day he came back and he'd been queuing at B&Q to get in for 2 hours for a ball cock to repair a toilet. And then when he was there, something else broke and he said, I've got to go back and queue for something minor again. But in between that time, he was also counted because the staff, some of the staff would go off until we could get a test and they could come back to work. He was also counted in some of the numbers for some of the more able-bodied people to help feed. So he was allocated 5 patients who we would sit and chat to and give them their breakfast and give them so in between doing all this, he would come in, so we'd get up, give them their breakfast, these 5 patients, or take their breakfast to their rooms or feed those who needed feeding. And then he'd start and do his bit, and then he'd come back at lunchtime and do his 5, then he'd go back out and get some more supplies in or repair whatever we had to repair, and then come back at tea time and then feed the 5 patients again. Every single day this was. So if every one of them would say they fancied fish and chips or they fancied something, he'd go and get them something different because these 5 patients were his. So he would treat them to a sherry or whatever and go and take them sherry or a glass of whiskey. But his workload did increase. But also what also affected it, unbeknown to us, was he was watching this on the TV. Well, we both were, every single day. There was a rule in the house that we don't normally put the TV on till 6 o'clock at night, unless grandchildren were there. But this was on from morning till night. Our TV was on when we were watching what was developing every single day. And when Boris Johnson said that they were going to test in care homes, there was such a relief for us all to start being tested. And on that very same week, Mr. Drakeford turned that around. He said they won't be doing it in Welsh care homes in Wales because he didn't see. Well, in fact, his words were the resources would be better spent elsewhere. We just sat back in the chair, and he just said to me, "What do we do now?" And I said, I don't know. We just keep working.
And you explain very vividly in your statement that Vernon began to lose weight.
He did.
He became, as you say, more depressed, effectively.
He did, yeah.
He'd seen an awful lot of horrific situations arising within the home in terms of people dying at that stage. And you tried to reassure him.
I did.
At various points, including saying, soon we will have some respite, we will go on a break.
Yeah, I said to him at the end of June, we're going to Spain no matter what. We are going to June, we are going to Spain. That's the last thing I said to him.
No, I appreciate that, Miss Hough. And sadly, on the 21st of May, you were notified, weren't you, by an officer?
Well, this was on the Wednesday, the 20th, and we were having a glass of sherry outside, funnily enough, and I said, we're going to go to Spain. And then he came back down and said, how are we going to go with this epidemic, with this pandemic? And I said, we put our gloves and masks on and we just go. And then on the Thursday, he'd gone to work. He had gone to work. He'd even fed his patients. He'd fed his patients, and I thought he'd gone shopping. And then the police came and told me that, unfortunately, he'd been found in the police car park and he'd shot himself in the police car park in the car.
I think that's...
Thank you, Mr. Hough. I think that's as far as we need to go today. Thank you very much.
You've been so extraordinarily brave, and I know it's in your statement, and members of the public may not know, but given how you were treated by certain sections of the media when your husband's death became public, I can't tell you how impressed I am by the courage that you've shown.
Oh, thank you.
In coming to tell us, because what you've had to tell the inquiry, and indeed the public, is so important. It's obviously, it covers all sorts of different aspects of the COVID pandemic, and we are extremely grateful to you.
Thank you. I just think the public should know that it was extremely hard. We had nothing in the care homes at all, nothing, no help.
I hope you feel it's been of help. I can't imagine what it's like reliving it all.
Yes, it's fine.
Well, thank you very much
Thank
indeed.
you.
And we're going to break now, and I know that a representative will come and see you and talk to you before you go. So, and don't forget, we also have a counselling team here if you need it.
That's all right, thank you.
I shall return at 2:20.